Gail and Brent's hometown. It was 5:30 a.m. on January 17, 1994, and Laurie McBride and William Bernstein suffered broken femurs from the Northridge earthquake. Brannon Braga was teleported to a Jesuit spacecraft for an emergency meeting among the Jesuits. Since all the Paramount Studios cameras malfunctioned after the earthquake, he was transported when no one was looking. In fact, Brannon just vanished from Paramount Studios during the earthquake, while everyone was evacuating Paramount Studios. The cloaked Jesuit spacecraft hovered near Paramount Studios and used transporter technology to beam up Laurie McBride and William Bernstein to the craft. The interior of the craft had a green light UFO aura, and it seemed to rely on power that came from hell. 17-year-old Zach Knight, according to his 20th century body, was a top Jesuit and aboard the craft when he shook Brannon Braga's hand as Brannon beamed aboard the craft. Zach, born in the 16th century, had a mysterious past, but maintained a youthful appearance with UFO technology, using reverse-aging hormones infused into his body. So, in his 20th century life, he'd claim he was born on June 6, 1996, at least most of the time. The resemblance between Zach and Ignatius of Loyola was uncanny, though. Both Zach and Ignatius had similar hair coloring, with similar nose and eyebrow structures. Both were big-shot Jesuit leaders. His 20th century life started when he was mysteriously dumped off at the door of a Jesuit cathedral as a baby on June 6, 1976, where he was raised in California. Zach had a perfect penis of which he was extremely proud. He was born with the ability to make women pregnant by looking at them. Unlike Laurie McBride, Zach was not a clone created in a cloning lab, but was a prime, meaning he had a father and mother from the 16th century and did not come into existence through a cloning lab. Zach stood with his legs firm apart, a bit of a swagger in his movements. He looked like the singer Robin Thicke at age 17. He walked over to Laurie and William like a man in charge. "Looks like we've got some injuries here." Some fallen angels with long, spindly fingers moved with speed toward the cots where William and Laurie lay. William and Laurie's legs bled onto the sheets from their earthquake injuries. The aliens whisked by William and Laurie and flipped out a scanner from which a ray emanated onto the injured legs. The lacerated tissue came together, as if going in reverse motion from the time of the injury, so that their wounds were healed and their broken bones fused together, and within 15 minutes, Laurie's broken femur was completely restored, and Mr. Bernstein's femur was mostly restored. Though they did allow Mr. Bernstein to have stitches. Laurie was completely healed, and her injured leg was as good as new. Laurie bounced off her cot and hugged the short creature with dark, protruding eyes. "Cool lighting. I like the aura. Perhaps someday me and Brent can make love aboard a UFO." She flipped her head, and her hair flipped about casually. "I'm forever indebted to you. How can I pay you back? Damn that Jesus!" William Bernstein, his broken bone mostly healed, bolted up, sitting in his cot bed. Brannon stood up straight and tall. "We have a spaceship that looks like a version of the International Space Station, but it's bigger and it's cloaked with an invisibility shield. We can all go to the spaceship hospital if we need repairs. They'll give us instruments that will beam us up to it. We use the bit-by-bit cloning technology to repair any injuries and to create new limbs or body parts from damaged ones. Basically, Laurie and William just got the injured part of their legs replaced with brand new clone leg parts." Brannon swaggered about, still standing tall and proud. "With my engineering background, I have the ability to understand this pretty good. That's how I created you, Laurie, in that cloning lab." Lori looked around in admiration of the spacecraft, a smirk of triumph on her face. "Even an earthquake can't keep me down. We only use this hospital spaceship they made us for dire emergencies. Brent has a fairly solid legal case against us." "Not if my injured leg is as good as new," Lori laughed. "We'll just say that I wasn't in the makeup trailer during the earthquake, and that Brent and Michael Westmore made the whole thing up." Lori bounced toward the aliens. "I bet you cool little guys could clean up the blood from the makeup trailer and from Mr. Bernstein's Paramount private room where we had secret meetings." The alien seemed to smile. Brannon nodded his head no. "That makes it obvious we used UFO technology. We just transported the makeup trailer out of the studio and threw it all out in a city dumpster and used transporter technology to remove all the blood off the trailer debris at the dumpster." "What about Mr. Bernstein's private room? The blood there?" Lori asked. "We're going to leave the blood there and allow Mr. Bernstein to limp around a bit," Brannon said, "because of what our little friends did here. Within a couple months, his leg will be as good as new." Zach stepped forward and plopped himself down into a chair, flipping his leg casually onto a chair in front of him. While lounging back in his chair, his leg in front of him, he gazed with a firm look at all in the room. "Besides, we'll transport Bernstein to our space hospital every week or so and facilitate the healing. We just didn't want to heal him all at once. Too obvious UFO interference." Zach now took over the room. "Well, in case our space hospital gets discovered, we'll explain that scientists like me discovered that gravity is caused by the distortion of space and time, and we can create artificial gravity in our space hospital by manipulating that distortion to produce Earth-like conditions using gravitons and magnetism via higher dimensions." "We definitely need to keep this UFO technology secret. Makes it easier to trick everyone," Lori gloated. "The science we're using is so advanced that no human scientist would know this stuff unless a UFO helped us," Brannon interjected. Zach arched his eyebrows, assuming a cocky air. "Satan's got to run the planet, not Jesus." He sat with his legs spread wide apart, emphasizing his perfect penis. "Like astronauts bounce all over the place inside the International Space Station because they haven't figured out how to do artificial gravity. We'll just claim we got Nobel Prize winning scientists. The UFO had nothing to do with it. Get it? Our top scientists are so good we can figure out how to do artificial gravity inside spaceships." Suddenly, they all fizzled out and reappeared inside their space hospital. It looked like Dr. Beverly Crusher's medical quarters on a Star Trek spaceship, except it was darker and decorated with penis statues and sex orgy monuments and penis water fountains, and no one was bouncing around from lack of gravity either, like they do inside the International Space Station. It was like they were on Earth with air conditioning. It had a long table, and Zach sat in the middle of the table and faced his audience like William Bernstein used to do at Paramount Studios before the earthquake. Before Zach was William Bernstein, Lori McBride, and Brannon Braga. Zach pointed to William Bernstein. You're going back to the Paramount restroom and will emerge limping. You just say you used that private room of yours that Jesus' damn earthquake exposed to meditate in. That you're innocent of any damn conspiracy." Lori leaned forward in anticipation, listening to Zach. "Lori," Zach said. "Brent's scheduled for a San Antonio Star Trek convention on February 6th with his mom, brother, and family. He's trying to make appearances without you so that Gail won't dump his wiretap, to drown out his May 1993 appearance with you at Minneapolis that Gail read about in data entries." A smirk came over Zach's face. "Brent put his family on his wiretap of Gail's phone. But your leg's as good as new. You say you were not in the makeup trailer, that you were at Brent's house. So how could you have brain control drugs to harm Brent there?" A smirk came over Zach's face. He stood up from his chair and danced about with perfect dance moves, his sneakers moving in perfect coordination like a professional dancer, as if jiving to some Robin Thicke music, then turned around and pointed at Laurie's formerly injured leg. "How could it be true that you fractured your femur in the earthquake, when 3 weeks later you'll walk just fine with Brent and his family at the San Antonio convention? So you'll say Brent planted those syringes, the dart gun, and the brain control drugs in the makeup trailer to frame you. Get it?" Zach looked sternly at Laurie. "Be sure to show up at that convention with Brent and his family. Gail needs to know that you're Brent's girlfriend, so she dumps Brent for good." Zach laughed. Zach threw some radio phones to all there. "You can communicate with me through these. They work in earthquakes, too. And they're private for Jesuits only and can't be wiretapped." The laughter from the Robin Thicke look-alike Zach Knight bounced from the roof and the walls. "Laurie, I'm going to transport you to Brent's house. Just go there and mark your territory." He looked at his scanner phone and fanned it outwards to show everyone that there were workers inside Brent's home. "When the workers inside Brent's home leave, we'll transport you there," Zach smirked. "Brent's house did pretty good in the earthquake, so that means you did pretty good because you lived there." Zach laughed some more. Brannon smiled. "And what about me?" Zach's face turned towards Brannon, steel determination in his eyes. "We won't have you writing any more solo scripts for Star Trek. We pair you up with really good writers. However, we want Gail to kick Brent off her wiretap." Zach laughed. "Get it? Write episodes to make Brent look like the kind of guy who'd be compatible with Laurie and not Gail. We want to make Gail puke when she finds out about Laurie McBride as Brent's girlfriend and not his business associate." Zach bounced about, and his laughter seemed to shake all the walls of the space station. "Got it, boss," Brannon said. "So you're replacing Mr. Bernstein as my boss?" "Not openly, but in secret." A smirk came over Zach's face. He laughed some more. "We'll still play that Mr. Bernstein's the boss, but he needs to report to me for everything." Zach swirled around as if dancing in step. "Just use these transporter instruments to beam up from the bathroom stalls to our space hospital if we have to conduct any secret meetings, since it looks like our private room at Paramount got exposed by Jesus's earthquake." Zach bounced about the room in glee, dancing like a pro, and coughed in Brannon's face. "I just gave you some germs." He laughed and unzipped his pants, revealing his perfect penis. "If anyone asks why it took you so long in the stall, say you had major diarrhea. Any illness you get from the germs I gave you, we can fix easily." Laurie smiled and wandered over to Zach to pet his penis. "Nice penis." Zach pointed at each one in the room he just gave instructions to. One of his eyebrows arched higher than the other, and a mischievous smirk emanated from his face. "Get to work." The gyrating motions from Zach's hip filled the space room with triumph as he whirled and danced in a Robin Thicke-style outfit with his superstar sneakers, grabbing Laurie's rear and slapping it as she beamed off the spaceship. Laurie lifted a fist in triumph as a goodbye gesture. While Laurie was at Brent's house, she left evidence she was there by leaving some tampons with her blood in it on Brent's bed and left some more blood-soaked tampons around his bathroom. She had a bottle of Brent's semen and put some of the semen on the tampons, applying it like frosting on a cake. She got a call from Zach Knight. "Hey, Laurie, you marked your territory?" "Yep, boss." Laurie flipped her head. "I also got lots of video of me in Brent's house." "Good job. Get out of there before Brent comes home from Sacramento today. We want his guard down." "What's up?" "We're going to have you disappear for a while, so we can make sure you can appear with him at the San Antonio Con 3 weeks from now. Brent will try and stop it if he knows for sure you'll be there. Could even cancel his appearance. Zach smiled. Now, we wouldn't want him to do that. Not if you're going to be there. Zach's laughter rocked from his room at the spaceship. Where do I hang out in the meanwhile? The secret space station. Suddenly, Lori beamed out of Brent's house and landed inside the secret space hospital, where she lounged about and got briefings from Zach Knight. When Brent returned from his time in Sacramento at Dan Lundgren's house on January 20th, 1994, he noticed immediately the blood-soaked tampons with his semen on them. His house was in good repair after the Northridge quake, thanks to his good lawyer's work. But for some reason, someone left the tampons there and the blood looked fresh. For God's sake, he thought to himself, I wasn't even here. How did they get my semen on these tampons? He brought the bloody tampons soaked in his semen inside a bag to LeVar Burton's house because LeVar acted as a go-between for Brent's lawyer. The lawyer didn't want to be known, so that the lawyer wouldn't be killed by the major conspiracy against Brent and Gail, which the lawyer strongly suspected was the Jesuits. Wow, LeVar said, staring at the nasty tampons. Looks like Lori's still alive and well. Like the roof on the makeup trailer never fell on her leg. She's even earthquake-proof, LeVar frowned. Have you seen her anywhere? I mean, has anyone seen her? Brent said, feeling nervous. Last time I saw her was inside my makeup trailer, and she had a broken femur and was about to inject me and Michael Westmore with brain control drugs. Nope, LeVar frowned, but we know this bitch can't be killed. She just pops up alive after she's dead, so she apparently can't stay injured either. LeVar sat down. Hey, I need to talk to you. Brent didn't like the grim look on LeVar's face. Hey, I've been talking to our lawyer, and they say Lori claims she was at your house the whole time of the earthquake, and that you and her had lots of sex right before you left for work on the day of the quake, January 17th. Oh, God, Brent frowned. How did she heal her leg so fast? Who knows? No one's seen her. But that's what her lawyer says. LeVar shook his head in amazement at what bitch Lori could get away with. Brent rolled his eyes. If Jesus sent that earthquake, he isn't too good, not if Lori's still roaming about. LeVar chuckled. Well, the earthquake did stop her from using her syringes on you and Michael. You plan on going to that San Antonio Star Trek convention in 3 weeks? Yeah, Brent's eyes looked determined. Gail read about Lori with me at that Minneapolis convention in May 1993, and I can't afford to have Gail throw me off her wiretap. Right now, the only way I know if she's okay is because of my wiretap on her phone, because Gail can't write me anymore. Brent fought back tears. I'll miss her letters. That damn lawyer who sent her that notice in November banned her from writing me. Brent smiled, but I'm enjoying hearing her voice on the phone. She talks to me all the time on the wiretap. She caught on real fast that I wiretapped her phone. Just dials her own number, gets a blank, and talks to me all the time. Brent frowned. On to Lori. Gail wrote me around August 1993 and thinks that blonde who was with me at the May 1993 Minneapolis convention was a business associate. LeVar laughed. Oh, I get it. You want to make more appearances to drown that one time Lori was with you so that Gail won't suspect that Lori might be more than a business associate? Yeah. Well, it appears we have Paramount on the defensive. They can't make you appear at Star Trek conventions with Lori anymore. But aren't they claiming that Lori wasn't there in my makeup trailer during the earthquake, and that we made up all that stuff about her syringes and brain control drugs? Yeah, but we have sworn statements from you and Michael Westmore that she was there and that she tried to inject both of you with brain control drugs. Don't you have Lori's blood from the makeup trailer? I mean, her femur broke during the earthquake, thank God for that, and her blood went everywhere. Brent sighed in frustration. If I had signed that statement Lori wanted to brain control me into signing where I'd basically commit Gail to a psych ward, Gail would be dead or close to dead, Brent sighed. I guess thank God for the earthquake. LeVar frowned. That makeup trailer got removed, and they dumped it into a dumpster, and we located it and can't find a trace of Laurie's blood on it anywhere." "What?" Brent's eyes opened in amazement. "We're claiming that what they dumped into the dumpster is not the makeup trailer you guys were in, and they just got rid of the evidence because they're guilty." LeVar seemed really spooked out about all this. "So what's next?" Brent frowned. LeVar stared at Brent. "Is it true you put your mom, Sylvia, and your brother Ron on Gail's wiretap?" "Yup, sure did." Brent eased in closer to his friend. "I want my mom, brother, uncle, and all my family to appear with me at San Antonio without Laurie McBride, so that Gail can read about me with my family at this con and know that the cute blonde I appeared with in Minneapolis in May 1993 is not my girlfriend. Don't want Gail to kick me off her wiretap." A tear slipped down Brent's face. "I gotta make sure that Gail's okay, now that I can't get her letters anymore. Laurie's always threatening to kill her." LeVar seemed concerned. "You sure it's a good idea to appear with your family at this con? What if Laurie shows up?" "She wouldn't dare. Not with my family. They hate her guts." Brent sighed. LeVar laughed. "You don't have to do the cons anymore, Brent. We put that in the new legal agreement with Paramount." "I have some tricks up my sleeve," Brent smiled. "Also, I'd love to show up at a con with my family without Laurie, to make up for the con in Minneapolis, where Laurie was with me and Gail read about it. Horrors!" "Hope your plans work, bud," LeVar frowned. "Did you make these plans with your Texas family over the phone by any chance?" "Yeah. That San Antonio convention is only 3 weeks away. We're too busy working on Star Trek to fly out to converse one-on-one with family several states away." "I bet the evil conspiracy knows about your plans." LeVar hugged Brent. "Be careful. Regardless, I'm here for you if you need me." A tear trickled down Brent's face. "Yeah, you're my friend forever." Knowing Laurie McBride would always try to board any jet Brent was on, and that Laurie seemed aware of his San Antonio convention appearance for February 6, 1994, Brent decided to leave for the February 6 convention a week before the convention for his birthday on February 2nd to spend time with his mother in Houston. If he flew out there right on the weekend of the con, Laurie would be sure to board the jet. Brent smiled with satisfaction over the thought of flying on a plane without Laurie. Brent threatened to quit his job over Laurie being allowed into his makeup trailer on the day of the earthquake, so for that reason he had a limited role in Journey's End, the episode currently in production in February 1994. They had to work him in at the last minute when it was decided he would stay on at Star Trek. Paramount basically had to rewrite the script because of Brent and give him very little to do in this episode. This allowed him to leave on February 1st, 1994, to be with his mother in Houston well in advance of his upcoming February 6 San Antonio convention. He managed to fly out to San Antonio without Laurie on the jet. "This is awful, son," Brent's mother Sylvia frowned. "I knew Hollywood and acting was a rough lot for you, but never expected this." Brent sighed. It was so nice to be away from Paramount Studios. He'd barged into William Bernstein's office on January 21st, 1994 with his front lawyer and demanded he be released from his contract because Paramount allowed Laurie into his makeup trailer. Brent was ready to quit. William Bernstein at that time wore a cast on his leg from the earthquake. "At least I don't have to appear with Laurie at Star Trek conventions anymore," Brent said to his mom, Sylvia. "But Laurie always breaks into my house no matter what I do." "Do you want to quit Hollywood, son?" his mother Sylvia asked. Brent sighed. "Yeah, but I need to put all the money into investments first so I can live off the investments. Not quite there yet. Besides, dealing with Laurie is expensive." "Is Gail worth all this, son?" His mother stared into his eyes. "It sounds like you may be sacrificing your career for her, and now you're finally financially secure as an actor." Mom, Brent's eyes gazed downwards. When I read Gail's letters from 1989 to 1993, it seemed a part of me inside woke up. It's like her soul and mine belong together in the heavens. Sylvia leaned back in her chair. Wow. Her eyes gazed in admiration at her son. I always knew I raised a good boy. The firm, calm gaze of her eyes soothed his nerves. She understood that there was more to life than a cushy bank account. Hollywood is sucking the life out of you. She gazed at him with concern. You're a good boy, because that's how I raised you. That honorable heart I instilled into you would want to kill himself after what Laurie's done to you. I really feel for you, son. Brent sighed and looked away from his mom in shame. I'll admit, I've considered suicide, but thinking of Gail stops me. You see, if I die, they'll kill her next. Wow! Sylvia's eyes opened wide in amazement. And she's the great niece of Howard Hughes and doesn't know it? She stood up from her chair with determination. I'll stand by you, son. Whatever you need, let me know. Pride in his mother swelled up inside him. She always rose to the occasion. This was why she was in charge of a furniture company. A tower of strength, that was her. Brent laid out his current strategy. Well, I thought if I could get my whole family to appear at the Star Trek convention on the 6th in San Antonio without Laurie, that may prevent Gail from kicking me off the wiretap I have on her. Brent chuckled. You see, Gail thinks I'm clever to have gotten this wiretap on her phone and has no idea about Laurie other than as a possible business associate. She says on the wiretap when she talks to me that she thinks I did the wiretap because of her crazy husband, David, who's threatened to divorce her for writing me. So, Sylvia seemed to be swirling theories inside her head and laughed. It's too bad you can't talk back to Gail and just offer to marry her and go off on a honeymoon with her. She smiled softly. She seems like a nice girl from what you've told me about her. Too bad she's married and not available except in ways that violate her conscience. But it's good she cares about her conscience. I like that about her. That's the thing, Mom. Gail offered to marry me in October 1992. But I didn't jump on the offer because of stitches in my rear from Laurie then. Damn that Laurie, Sylvia frowned. This is going to be risky, Mom. I can't promise that everything will be okay. Brent frowned. Nothing's safe when you're dealing with Laurie. Sylvia embraced Brent. You're my good boy, and I'll always be here for you. I'm going to get the whole family behind you and Gail. The eventful day of the San Antonio con arrived, and Brent's nerves rattled him. If this went off without a hitch, the fact that Laurie wouldn't be there with his family would be proof to Gail that the cute blonde Gail read about in data entries was nothing more than a business associate. As he, his mother, brother, uncle, and his brother's physician children all drove in limousines on I-10 headed for San Antonio, Brent stared out his window at the Texas landscape, flat like a Texas prairie. He smiled to himself, imagining Gail here in Texas. Yeah, Gail's moving out here in the summer. Her husband got a military transfer to Galveston. Isn't that amazing? That is amazing, son. Sylvia seemed to pick up on his apprehension about Gail possibly dumping him when she learned about Laurie McBride as Brent's girlfriend. The limousines took an exit north to the Henry B. Gonzalez Convention Center, where they planned to park their limousines in a parking lot in the corner of the huge convention center. Brent knew better than to park in garages too confined, too easy for Laurie to corner him. Brent thought it fitting that he and his family would launch their protest against Laurie in the city that hosted the Alamo. It seemed to match his mood. Brent wore his protective Muslim garb. It would officially be removed in the convention center restroom once he and his family were in public view. Harder for Laurie to do her evil stuff. His family wore protective garb too and were giggling too over their outfits. The entire family looked like a Muslim family headed for Mecca. As they opened the doors to their limousines and stepped onto the parking lot pavement at the convention center. An electronic force field dropped out of the sky and enveloped all his family inside it. Brent's eyes stared at it in horror. What the hell? The force field did not drop over Brent. Off in the distance, Brent saw Laurie McBride laughing as she sauntered towards him and his families. Oh my God! That force field came from her! Was there anything this bitch couldn't do? Laurie tromped over to him, her head raised high, as if he was expecting her. What the hell are you doing here? Brent's eyes glared at her. As he spoke to her, all her family members seemed under a spell, and they removed all their protective garb and dropped their garbs on the pavement as if they were commanded to do so. Oh my God! Was Laurie going to inject them with brain control drugs now? He scanned her furiously to see if she had syringes. So his family was looking like how they were supposed to look later, after they would enter the convention center's restrooms to remove their protective garbs. The force field then levitated their discarded garments up into the air. Oh my God! Then it enclosed the garments inside a force field bubble, and then the bubble whisked their garbs into the sky and vanished. Oh my God! The garments just vaporized out of existence. Brent saw his mother, brother, uncle, and family members go to Laurie and embrace her like family. There were brain control drugs inside that force field that draped over his family, so Laurie didn't need her needles. Brent ran his fingers through his hair in a panic and forced himself to stay calm, but Brent was still in his Muslim protective garb, so the intelligent force field didn't drape over him. It was like the force field knew about his legal contract, where Laurie was not allowed to use brain control drugs on him, but the contract didn't say she couldn't use them on his family. Sylvia looked at Brent in amazement, not recognizing her son in his Muslim garb. She was obviously now under brain control. She looked around as if she was lost. Where's Brent? Mom, don't you remember? Brent frowned, looking at his mom in amazement. We wear this protective garb to protect you from Laurie's brain control syringes. Laurie snorted upon hearing Brent say this. Brent then removed his balaclava so his mom could see his face. Is that you, son? Sylvia's mouth opened in amazement. What the hell are you dressed like that for? Laurie waltzed over to Sylvia and put her arm inside of Sylvia's and acted like they'd known each other for 10 years. They started waltzing into the convention center like one big happy family. I need to talk to Laurie alone, Brent said, easing away from his family. Brent pulled Laurie off to the side and away from his family. What the hell do you think you're doing? Laurie's mouth formed into a snarl. She bore her teeth like a growling bear. It's about time you treated me like your girlfriend and future wife. No way you going to be my future wife. Brent nodded his head ferociously. No. He could feel the fury rising inside him. Laurie smiled, her eyes full of devilment. It would be too bad if your family got in a car wreck on their way home from here, and perhaps Gail, too. Oh, okay. Brent was telling himself to calm down. What was that electronic drape you put over my family? Laurie's eyes opened wide in amazement. She eased up to Brent, and he jumped back. I think you need to see a shrink, honey. Brent had to think fast. Even his bodyguard and driver had fallen under the brain control from whatever the hell Laurie electronically draped over his family in the convention parking lot. He pulled out his phone to cancel his flight home to L.A. that night. All right, bitch. Looks like you won on this round, and you get to appear with my family at this convention. Brent wished he could cancel his appearance here, but it was too late. If there was a puke bucket nearby, it would have come in handy, but Brent managed to pull himself together. But when I'm done doing my appearance, I won't be flying to L.A. Brent snarled at Laurie. I canceled my flight. Tell Paramount that I quit. If they want to know why I haven't shown up for filming tomorrow. Rage eked from Laurie's eyes, but like a professional actor, it disappeared very quickly. For the con appearance, Laurie strolled into the auditorium with Brent's family as if she hadn't a care in the world. Brent got into character like actors can do, and acted like nothing out of the ordinary happened while doing his thing for the San Antonio Star Trek convention. As soon as appearance for the con was over, he headed for the nearest bathroom and almost puked while putting his muslin protective garb back on to protect his head and face. Thoughts of Gail dumping him over Laurie at this appearance with his family made him want to vomit. His brother Ron insisted on taking video footage of the family together. "Let's skip that." Brent hurtled his family into their limousines. Then he turned to Laurie. "Okay, Laurie, you better leave or I'll call the police. I'll be submitting evidence to my lawyer that you used brain control on my family." Laurie snorted and laughed. "Good luck trying to prove that. You're flying home alone on that plane, bitch. I canceled my flight. I may sell my L.A. house next and quit Hollywood, period." All his family members were inside the limousines with one limousine, its engine purring and ready to go. Brent's older brother Ron stared at Brent as though confused over the acrimony between Brent and Laurie. Laurie took off in a huff, her eyes balls of fire. Rather than take a taxi to the airport to head back to L.A., Brent drove the limousine back to Houston with his family, and the brain-controlled drugs began wearing off, and his mother was among the first to come to. "I feel a bit nauseated, Brent," she said. "Mom, that's what Laurie's brain control drugs do." As the brain control wore off, his mom and brother in the same limousine with him stared at Brent in horror as the realization of what just happened to them eased into their consciousness. The other family members traveled in another limousine driven by a Texas sheriff that Brent called to his rescue. Apparently, aerosol brain control drugs didn't work as well as injections or drinks, so the brain control only lasted about an hour and a half, allowing Brent to explain to his family on their drive back to Houston how their plan to use the San Antonio convention to prove Laurie was not his girlfriend had failed. LeVar Burton heard that Brent quit his job as Data and flew out to Houston on February 8, 1994, to meet with Brent and his family. They all sat in Sylvia's Houston living room together. "I'll only work at Paramount if they rewrite the contract that if Laurie shows up in public with me at Star Trek conventions or any other public appearances, that I'm allowed to quit my job on the spot right then and there," Brent said. LeVar frowned. "I understand how you feel, Brent, but you need the money from your job right now. And we already arranged for the contract to be reworded just as you said. Brent, you got expensive house payments to make." LeVar laughed. "I have to say I admire your gumption. Paramount's about to lose face big time that you've threatened to quit over this, and they seem willing to bend over backwards to accommodate you." LeVar smiled faintly, a bit freaked out by how things were turning out for his friend Brent. "Laurie's not allowed in the studio." Brent sighed. "Not sure I'll do the feature films they're planning after the show ends. We'll see." LeVar and his family stared at Brent with concern written all over their faces. "Do you think some fan's going to write about Laurie being with your family at this convention in the data entries Gail reads?" LeVar asked, knowing Gail reads data entries at Brent Spiner fansign. "Oh, God, I hope not," Brent snarled in disgust. "But if some fan writes about Laurie with my family in San Antonio, Paramount can't get in trouble over what a fan writes in a fansign. I just hope that if that happens, Gail will still keep me on her wiretap." "Yeah, we gotta protect Gail and know how she's doing," LeVar said. "Those bastards have blocked her from writing you." In July 1994, about 5 months after Brent's San Antonio con, David Schuler's Coast Guard job transferred him, Gail, and her son to Galveston, Texas, out of 120 possible duty stations. Gail was amazed that it seemed Jesus arranged for her to move to Brent's hometown. David didn't know that Houston, Texas was Brent's hometown, or at least that's what Gail thought. Gail saw this as a sign from God that the promises he gave her, that there was a place for her and Brent, like in the Somewhere song from West Side Story, and that Brent was part of God's plan for her life. But right before Gail moved to Houston in July 1994, she put herself back on lithium because she couldn't take her sleep problems anymore, and she didn't want to have sleep problems as she drove their car from Seattle to Houston. Gail drove one car, and her husband David drove their other car out to Texas. They went through Los Angeles and Arizona on their way to Houston in July 1994, and Brent made no appearances to Gail while her family stayed in a hotel in Los Angeles to visit Disneyland. Gail recalled she saw the Hollywood sign over the Hollywood Hills and knew Brent was near her, but because she was with David, knew he wouldn't appear. About this time, Brent visited Japan. Gail suspected he may have done this to honor her in his own way, since Gail's mother, Masao, was Japanese. So in July 1994, Gail's family moved to Alvin, Texas, a southern suburb of Houston, where they rented a small apartment. The drive to Galveston, where David was stationed, was less than an hour from Alvin. Gail told David she didn't want to live on the island because of hurricanes. She also secretly wanted to be as close to Brent's hometown, Houston, as possible to research for her novel that honored Brent. Gail did a tremendous amount of research for her novel Silver Skies from her Alvin apartment, and used the Houston scenes where she lived and visited where Brent grew up in Bel Air and Meyerland, and used these scenes in her novel in order to write a novel to honor him. Sometimes she saw a dark limousine with dark windows parked in the parking lot of her first-floor apartment at Meadow Park Apartments at 2800 Mustang Road, Alvin, Texas 77511. Gail knew Brent's mother lived in Houston somewhere, and perhaps Brent visited her. She suspected that Brent had a limousine drive him to Alvin so he could see her. The limousine just sat there in her parking lot. Brent was inside that limousine. While in the limousine, Brent managed to get some photos of Gail and video footage of her, since Laurie had destroyed all of what Gail sent him from 1990 to 1993. While Gail lived in Texas, she subscribed to the Houston Chronicle and used this paper for research for her novel. In Alvin, she often drove about a 45-minute drive from Alvin to Meyerland, where Brent grew up, to research for Silver Skies. She'd go to Meyerland, park her car, and take notes, and used all her senses to describe the place so she could put Brent's hometown into her novel. She also called local conservative synagogues and visited several conservative synagogues in Houston to do further research for Silver Skies. She chose to make her rabbi conservative because she really wanted to make her rabbi character Dor Ben Habakkuk Orthodox. But not being raised Jewish, felt she couldn't write an Orthodox rabbi well. She planned on having some tribulation scenes from the book of Revelation in Silver Skies, and felt that God would discard the more liberal Jews in the tribulation. She thought the 144,000 Jewish missionaries depicted in Revelation would be Orthodox Jews. She would call the synagogue ahead of time and ask how she should dress for their services. She let them know she was a Christian who wanted to visit their synagogue and wanted to be respectful of their beliefs as a visitor, and that she wanted to visit their synagogue to research for her novel because she had a rabbi for a main character. Gail chose a rabbi for her main character to honor Brent's Jewish heritage, not knowing she herself had Jewish ancestry. They always told her to wear church clothes. So the Jewish Dor Ben Habakkuk character was sort of Brent, and the Gentile and Christian Brianna character in Silver Skies was sort of Gail. Gail wanted a story that reflected the quality of her relationship with Brent and that removed the celebrity aspects of their relationship, since that meant nothing to Gail and was even a detriment. One time, Gail wanted to take her son with her, but didn't have time to visit a synagogue store to buy him a kippah to show respect for Jewish custom. So she took out her $500 Montgomery Ward sewing machine, drove to the local Walmart, found some velvety blue material, and bought a silvery braid to put on the outside. She then went home and created her own pattern and sewed her son a velvety blue kippah with a silvery braided border. The next day, she drove with her son Eric to the synagogue's congregation Beth Yeshurun in Bel Air and congregation Brith Shalom, close to where Brent went to high school at Bel Air High School. Eric loved the synagogues and especially enjoyed dancing around with the congregation as they celebrated a Jewish feast right after Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of the Booths, Sukkot. Gail didn't know it, but Brent's mother, Sylvia, was in the congregation Beth Yeshurun services. She observed Gail taking writer notes about the service to assist her as she wrote her novel Silver Skies. Sylvia, Brent's mother, had a very good impression of her. These are the notes Gail took of her visit to congregation Beth Yeshurun on Tuesday, September 20th, 1994, in a morning service. The building was large, and the cars parked in the back. Upon entering the sanctuary through glass doors, one saw a large display with many miniature Sukkots built by children. They all had what looked like thatched roofs made from sticks, pieces of woods, and tree branches. Inside some were dolls representing people. The dolls were colorful and creative. Just outside the glass doors was a large thatched roof about the size of a large patio, large enough to accommodate a swimming pool, though there was no swimming pool. It had artificial bananas, oranges, apples, pears hanging from its thatched roof. In Sukkot, it's important that you can see the sky, so all roofs are thatched loosely, not tightly. Upon entering the sanctuary, a service was in progress. An elderly man was leaning on a podium which came to his elbows. He was saying a prayer in Hebrew, but with a chant. It sounded like a melancholy melody sung in the minor key. It gave the place a feeling of worship, as though to enter this sanctuary one came upon the presence of God. Many heads were bowed, and during especially sacred moments, many men slightly bent their knees and swayed back and forth, tilting slightly forward. The talit, prayer shawls they wore, draped around both shoulders, stood out as the men swayed in rhythm with the chanting prayers. These talit were bordered with gold, silver, and showy embellishments. These are the prayer shawls. The ark in the back behind the podium contained many glittering, elaborate scrolls representing the Torah. There were 2 candelabra with electric lights, which looked like the flames of candles from a distance, which contributed to the feeling of worship and awe one felt upon entering the sanctuary. All men wore the kippah, the round decorative head covering. Women wore dresses and skirts like typical church clothes. The atmosphere was quiet, though some chanted in Hebrew in unison with the man up front. Everyone held a prayer book, which read from right to left as the Oriental books do. "Page 54, boomed a scholarly-looking 30-ish man from the back of the congregation. At this announcement, you heard the flutter of pages turning. As everyone found page 54, this man chanted his Hebrew loudly and put all heart into the chanting. One must assume he was a rabbi or a cantor. The inside of the building was paneled with brown wood. To the upper right of where Gail and her son sat were stained glass windows that were embellished with various symbols representing candelabra, stars of David, and Hebrew letters. To the back of the building were stacks of prayer books and other books. The flat carpet was light turquoise. The seats resembled the seats in a movie theater, linked together, well cushioned, with a turquoise velvety covering. The backs of the seats were a light brown stained, smoothed, waxed wood. There were several seats up front on the podium, at a right angle to the audience where cantors and rabbis and others could sit. The up front podium section was raised, and you climbed up onto it by carpeted steps. Of significance during the Sukkot service was that toward the end of the service, many congregants went to the front right of the building, to the front of all the seating, and retrieved lulavs and citrons from long oblong boxes. The citrons were in a box and wrapped neatly with hay-colored fibrous plant to help keep them fresh. Upon opening the box, the citron smelled like a strong lemon. It looked like a large, yellow, bumpy lemon, but is called an etrog for the Sukkot. The lulav used for the ceremony was a long palm branch in the center, held together by woven palm leaves, so that on the right side was a myrtle branch and on the left side was a willow branch. The palm leaves were woven together so neatly they looked like a type of placemat. But they were neat enough so that each branch had its own socket. A socket on the right for the myrtle, a place in the middle for the palm, and a socket on the left for the willow. With plenty of weeping willows in Houston, the willow looked very much like a weeping willow. Congregants held the etrog or lemon with its tip pointing down and the stem upward for the Sukkot service. Several times during the service, the lulav was pointed to the front, to the east, and shaken 3 times. Each time, the motion of shaking was followed by a drawing in. That is, the hands were stretched out, the lulav was shaken, and then pulled back, stretched out, shaken, and pulled back. The same motion was repeated 3 times to the right, south, over the right shoulder, west, left, north, up above them, and then down below. The person would bend over a little bit, but the lulav would not be pointed down. When the congregants walked around, they sang Hosanna constantly as they held the lulav and etrog or lemon. Gail and Eric participated in this ceremony and formed part of the procession. Apparently Sylvia was in this procession as well. Sylvia took some pictures of Gail and her son while Gail was in the service and gave them to Brent, knowing Laurie destroyed all his memorabilia of Gail. Brent's mom, Sylvia, kept them in her house for Brent, since it was not safe for Brent to store Gail memorabilia in his L.A. home because of Laurie. Gail did not realize that Brent's mother, Sylvia, was in the Sukkot service she attended. Gail did recall that during the Sukkot service, a young, ordinary-looking woman in the congregation gave her a jealous stare. She laughed to herself, thinking that among the unsaved, jealousy could be a problem. Gail considered anyone not a Christian to be unsaved and lacking the Holy Spirit, and therefore prone to sinful emotions. The lulav was always held with the right hand, and the etrog with the left. Many of the cars parked in the parking lot belonged to parents of school children attending the Hebrew school in the synagogue. This was apparently the same Hebrew school that Brent attended as a child. A well-regarded elementary school in Houston, by the way. The Kiddush was served outside, and it was a clear, sunny day with temperature around 80. The congregants wandered out after the service. They were informed there would be another service tonight at 7 p.m., with a Kiddush afterwards, and another morning service tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. After the service, a Kiddush, a blessing recited over wine or grape juice, to sanctify the holiday, was held, and a large loaf of bread with golden shiny humps was served, as well as slices of yellow cake, fruit bowls with grapes, bananas, apples, etc. Sylvia was apparently here, doing this as well. Gail and Eric enjoyed some of the fruit and didn't partake of the wine, as Gail felt alcoholic beverages went against her Christian convictions at the time. Also, alcohol was not recommended for someone on lithium, which Gail was taking then. Bottles of red wine were laid out and served. A prayer was said before the Kiddush, and everyone helped themselves or were served. There was also a table that served punch, separate from the main table. Eric loved the kippah Gail sewed for him for a service at Congregation Brit Shalom for Simchat Torah on September 27th and 28th, Tuesday and Wednesday of the next week. This was a celebration marking the conclusion of the annual cycle of public Torah readings and the beginning of a new cycle. A lady sat behind Gail at the synagogue and struck a conversation with her. The lady was quite impressed when Gail told her she sewed the kippah that her son wore. Gail bought several books about Jewish customs and beliefs at synagogue bookstores in Houston. She no longer has these books because she couldn't afford to move them from Seattle in 2001. Gail always felt at home in synagogues when she visited them, as if she belonged there and that she was with her own people, which was strange, she felt then, because she was not raised Jewish and not aware of her Jewish ancestry until around 2002. She didn't know, when she visited these synagogues, that she had 40% of the genetic profile of Jewish King David. In her Alvin, Texas apartment, she wanted to brighten it up and decided to sew some frilly peach-colored curtains over the sliding glass doors to match her apartment's carpet and coloring. So she got her Montgomery Ward sewing machine out, went to Walmart to buy the material and the pattern, and spent several days sewing curtains for her sliding glass doors. They really brightened the sliding glass doors, but she never used them again after she left Alvin because they were peach and didn't match the other apartment she lived in. As she worked on the curtains, she shared with Brent on her blank phone all she did. When Gail left her house that day, Brent, from his limousine, wandered over to Gail's apartment wearing his Muslim outfit and stared through the windows of Gail's first-floor apartment, admired the new curtains, and imagined that he wrapped them about his body. He also wandered over to her bedroom window and stared at her bed, wishing he could join Gail there. Brent's mom, Sylvia, arranged for Brent to have an apartment in Manvel, not too far away that he could stay in. Brent practically lived there and only went to L.A. once a month to check up on his L.A. house. Sylvia arranged to put cameras everywhere inside the Manvel apartment and outside of it, and cooperated with the Texas sheriffs to use the cameras to arrest Laurie if she dared show up. So Brent felt safer in Texas than in California. Gail always shared with Brent on her wiretapped phone every little thing about her life, all she thought about, all she did. Brent loved to hear from her. When she finished the sewing project, she told Brent about it on the phone, and he cheered her on with his noises. Brent was proud of all she did and seemed so proud of her for sewing curtains for her apartment. The Jesuits in 1995 began their flood of conspiracies to undermine the love between Brent and Gail, as if they hadn't done enough with Laurie McBride. At this time, 1995, the O.J. Simpson murder case aired on all the television networks. In this case, O.J. Simpson murdered his wife and Ron Goldman at Brentwood Estates at an address with the street name of Bundy. While Gail studied nursing at Florida State University in February 1978, Theodore Bundy murdered sorority girls at FSU. Gail recalled that her nursing professors canceled classes on the day of the murders, and they discussed how they all felt about the murders. Her friend, physician Keith Morgan, who ended up on Gail's marriage list around 2010, was at FSU at this time. The entire FSU community, in shock, didn't know who did the murders. When she went home to her dormitory that day, she closed the door with lightning speed and deadbolted the door. It appeared the Jesuits orchestrated the Theodore Bundy murders 1979, as well as O.J. Simpson's murder of his wife and Ron Goldman 1995, as the Jesuits attempted to create conspiracies that revolved around Gail, the Catherine the Great and King David woman. In July 1996, Gail's family moved to another section of Houston, 2702 West Bay Area Boulevard, number 4610, Webster, Texas, 77598-3146, telephone 281-992-2598, and her son transferred to another school. During this time, she joined Bay Area Writers League in the Clear Lake Park building at 5001 Nassau Road 1, a writers group that met near NASA in Clear Lake. She didn't go every month, but went about every other month to meetings just to be with writers and get some insights. She met one man, an officer in the writers group, about her age, an Orthodox Jew, who told her he wrote plays in the downtown Houston area. He always wore his kippah to the writers' meetings, so she knew he was Jewish. This was the only writers' group she ever got involved with. She preferred to work alone and to critique her own work. She never brought her work in for readings, though other writers in the group did. She shared with him about her rabbi character and her goals for Silver Skies. He told her, because she was a Christian, it would be difficult to write a good novel about a rabbi. He didn't degrade her, just made an honest assessment. She agreed it would be a challenge, but told him her heart was with this story. This was what she wanted to write. She told him she'd considered making her rabbi an Orthodox Jew, but considered this too challenging because she wasn't raised Jewish. So she made her rabbi a conservative Jew. Ironically, Gail didn't know it, but Brent went to a conservative Jewish day school in Houston and ended up visiting the synagogue, Congregation Beth Yeshurun, where his day school was. This Orthodox Jew agreed with her that it would be extremely difficult to write a convincing story about an Orthodox rabbi if one wasn't raised Jewish. Gail had called her German-Canadian friend Bridget Graham every year since she'd left Michigan in 1989. This time when she called her, she asked about the physician who delivered her son in September 1987, Dr. Thomas Orr, because she often thought about him. Bridget told her that a year after Gail left Michigan around 1990, Dr. Thomas Orr died from general anesthesia while he underwent surgery for a prostate procedure. Gail cried for an hour when she heard this. Gail and her husband David couldn't find a church they liked in the Houston area, so they had church at home, and she listened to videos of Dr. Peter Ruckman and Tex Mars for church. She played all these videos to Brent on her blank wiretapped phone for him. Gail also mentioned Jack Chick's book Smokescreens on her phone to Brent around February 1996, which detailed Jesuit plans for world domination and that they were behind the Nazi concentration camps and that Hitler was a Jesuit Manchurian candidate. Brent went out to purchase this book and decided that Laurie McBride was indeed a Jesuit, and that these Jesuits were one screwed-up, crazy organization. However, the Jesuits tampered with the Smokescreens book Brent read, or with Brent's mind, and he still wasn't aware that Laurie was a Jesuit agent with a mission. So in 1996, he just saw Laurie as the crazy Jesuit bitch who belonged to a crazy Jesuit religious cult, and not that she was in fact a Jesuit agent dedicated to her mission. Sometimes, when Brent was at his L.A. home and Laurie was with him, like when he had to be in L.A. to film for Star Trek First Contact in 1996, Laurie would run to the bathroom to puke as Brent listened to Gail's King James Bible-only preachers on his wiretap of her phone. Brent tried everything to keep Laurie out of the Beverly Hills home he moved into summer 1994, very shortly after he finished his run with the Star Trek The Next Generation television series, but alas, it was futile. Brent thought after he no longer had to do the show in 1994, and therefore Laurie couldn't trail him home from Paramount Studios, he could move to a new house and lose her. Though he did manage to buy his new Beverly Hills home in secret, or so he thought, in the summer of 1994. His mom, who owned a furniture company, had his new house stocked up with furniture, shipping the furniture from Texas, so that he didn't need to move furniture from his old Hollywood Hills house to his new Beverly Hills house in the summer of 1994. But after 2 months, Laurie found him in his new Beverly Hills home. So Brent took off to Japan for about a month around August 1994, that is, until Laurie stole his credit cards, buying clothes and sex gadgets at shopping malls, forcing Brent to return to the States to deal with that. Fans somehow heard about Laurie's shopping adventures and wrote about it with glee in the fanzines and gossip magazines. Gail did read about some of this too later, 1996 and later on the internet, when she learned about Laurie McBride on June 26, 1996. Brent's fans didn't have a good opinion of Laurie and called her a gold digger, lamenting that Brent should know better than to have a girlfriend who lived in shopping malls where she went on lavish spending sprees, obviously going to town with Brent's celebrity income. Brent's fans wondered why he had a girlfriend so obviously a gold digger, feeling he had foolish taste in women. Gail often wondered about this herself after she learned about Laurie McBride in June 1996. Gail had established a routine in her Webster apartment 1995 to 1996 where, when she first arose from her bed in the morning, she'd read the Bible, then go outside and get the newspaper. She had a subscription to the Houston Chronicle because she wanted to be up to date on all that happened in the world to assist her as she researched for her novel, and she wanted to hear what the other viewpoints had to say so that her novel would present a balanced picture of world events. She also had subscriptions to conservative publications like Text Mars, Flashpoint, and to Dr. Peter Ruckman's Bible Believers Bulletin. Many of the newspaper quotes in Silver Skies were culled from the Houston Chronicle. The night before, June 25, 1996, Gail read the June 26, 1996 Houston Chronicle article that made her realize Brent had a girlfriend named Laurie McBride. Gail recalled what she'd read in data entries about this cute blonde that all his fans who came to see him at Star Trek conventions wrote about. For some reason, on June 25, 1996, Gail went to her bedroom closet about 10 p.m., shut the door for privacy, and spoke to Brent on the wiretap phone. She felt she got better reception of his noises here in this closet. She tried to press him to let her know if he did indeed have a girlfriend. The evening of June 25, 1996, she asked him, "Who's this cute blonde that I read about in data entries? Do you have a girlfriend?" She listened for the typical noises on the phone. There was no change in the noises. "Look, I deserve to know if you have a girlfriend because I risked my marriage to communicate with you." She paused and for some reason decided to press this matter. So upset about Gail asking about Laurie, Brent didn't realize that Laurie was behind him. Brent wanted to make a noise to ensure Gail he did not have the cute California blonde as his girlfriend. Suddenly he got whacked over the head with a fry pan and conked out. Nothing changed on the phone, so Gail couldn't tell what he tried to say, if he tried to say anything at all. "I'm going to ask you if you have a girlfriend. If the answer is no, then make your noises louder. If the answer is yes, then be silent." Unfortunately for Brent, after Laurie knocked Brent out and dragged him to the basement, Laurie stole his noise-making device and listened with eager ears and laughing as Gail was now on the subject Laurie wanted. Nothing changed on the phone, and Gail felt that Brent tried to evade the question, but did feel he was on the other end listening. This made her suspicious that perhaps he did have a girlfriend. Unfortunately, Gail didn't know Laurie had knocked Brent out and had control over the noisemaker he used to make noises on Gail's wiretapped phone. "Look, if you have a girlfriend, I deserve to know. Why won't you answer this question? I can tell you're hiding something from me. You do have a girlfriend, don't you?" Again, let's change the requirements for the noises. If you have a girlfriend, then make your noises louder. And if you don't have a girlfriend, then be silent. Again, nothing significant changed on the phone. "I think you have a girlfriend, because if you didn't, you'd jump at this opportunity to let me know that you don't have a girlfriend and you aren't saying anything." Laurie then headed for his safe where he kept his credit cards and took off with his safe laughing. She could easily break into the safe now that Brent was out. Thank God Gail brought this subject up, Laurie thought, because Brent let down his guard and she was able to whack him over the head. Kind of hard to listen to Gail on the phone with a football helmet, she laughed to herself. Ha! Laurie loved it that Gail made Brent so upset. It gave her a glorious opportunity. All of a sudden, Gail got this strange suspicion that this cute blonde she'd read about in data entries was Brent's girlfriend. She fumed at this possibility that he could allow her to intrude into their sanctuary and to appear with him in public as if his feelings for her were a big game and she was not important enough for him to protect and cherish. She felt as if he was ashamed of his feelings for her and felt him a coward to have a girlfriend when he listened to her for hours and hours every day on the phone. How dare you have a girlfriend when I have no job and depend totally on my husband for support, and you know that I've risked everything to maintain my communication with you. You do have a girlfriend, don't you? How dare you? How dare you, when I would have died to keep you in my life because my husband would kill me over you? How dare you? You won't make it clear to me that you don't have a girlfriend, so I think you have one. Well, if this is the case, you can forget it. I'll dump you like a hot turkey. I won't tolerate this garbage from you. Why do you have to appear in public with this cute blonde? Is this cute blonde your girlfriend? And how could you have a girlfriend when you know how I feel about you? No answer, because Brent was unconscious. Because he wouldn't answer, she decided he didn't want to let her know whether he had a girlfriend or not, which she thought was strange. She decided that she did deserve to know one thing, and so she asked him, "Have you gone to bed with this cute blonde?" No answer. This made her really furious, because she thought for sure he'd want to let her know without reservation that he had not gone to bed with her. But the noises on the phone remained the same. He would not answer this question. "You mean you've gone to bed with her, and you still listen to me on the phone every day, and you let me make love to you every day on the phone? What do you think I am, some game player who takes my marriage vows lightly? Do you think I'd risk my marriage to make love to you if I knew you had a girlfriend?" No answer. She really screamed at him then, but it did no good, because he wouldn't tell her anything and she couldn't force him to talk. About the only questions he seemed to answer were the following. Does she understand and respect our feelings for each other? To this he seemed to reply in the affirmative. However, this answer didn't satisfy her, because he wouldn't make it clear to her whether he'd gone to bed with her. While Laurie was planning her party at Spago's, she also stole Brent's device that made noises on Gail's wiretapped phone and had fun with it. Later, Gail calmed down and felt guilty for her outrage, so unlike her. For her to get upset with Brent like this was rare, because she wasn't the jealous type. But for some reason, on the night of June 25th, 1996, Gail wanted Brent to clarify with her who this cute blonde was, and because Brent seemed to evade the question, especially the questions about whether he had sex with her, she got frustrated with him and screamed at him on her phone. For some reason, she wanted to press him about this matter on the evening of June 26, 1996. She had read about the cute blonde every couple months in the data entries letters section, where fans would comment about the cute blonde that Brent always appeared with at Star Trek conventions. She never went to Star Trek conventions because she thought them stupid, and Brent made sure to never attend any Star Trek conventions near her anyways. But even though she'd read about the blonde since 1993, it never occurred to Gail to press Brent about her until June 25, 1996. She always assumed the blonde was Brent's business associate, though Gail despised the blonde for the effect she had on him, because every time Gail read about her, the letter writers described Brent as nervous, and that at his Star Trek convention appearances he constantly looked at her. This indicated to Gail that this woman, whoever she was, put him on edge. To Gail, Laurie appeared shallow because she delighted in showing off with Brent at Star Trek conventions. She seemed one who delighted in public appearances with Brent, and Gail always felt that one's private life should stay private, and that any woman who delighted in parading her private life with a celebrity in public lacked depth or class or any real feeling for the man. This woman craved the limelight, and Gail knew Brent did not, so she and he could not have any true oneness or intimacy. Gail was correct in this assessment, but it confused her that he appeared in public with her. Her confusion and outrage over the cute blonde in Brent's life did seep into her novel Silver Skies, as she wrote often about shallow women who delighted to manipulate the press in order to manipulate their men and create false impressions. How little did she realize at the time, but she had brilliant discernment into how the Jesuits had manipulated the love life of Brent with Laurie. When Gail wrote about these brilliant, manipulative women for her novel, to her it was all make-believe. She really did not know Brent had Laurie as his girlfriend until June 26, 1996. But Gail did sense this cute blonde did not have Brent's best interests at heart. No one was at Gail's home at the time when she pressed Brent with these questions about the cute blonde, and Gail believed her son was asleep. Her husband was out to sea. But by the time bedtime rolled around, she apologized to Brent for her outrage and decided to forget about it and go to sleep. She figured the cute blonde was just a business associate because with all the time he spent listening to her on the phone, he couldn't have a girlfriend. And if he did have a girlfriend, it was a mighty strange relationship because she knew he listened to her every day for at least 2 hours. She could tell by the noises he made on her phone. No girlfriend would tolerate a boyfriend who listened to a woman make phone love to him and who shared her entire life to him on the phone for at least 2 hours every single day. Of course, Gail didn't realize that Laurie McBride was a criminal and therefore didn't have your typical girlfriend-boyfriend feelings, and that Laurie was in a predator relationship with Brent, where she was the predator and Brent the victim. Gail would figure this out later in December 1999. So Gail forgot about the cute blonde and went to bed. The next morning, Gail followed her usual routine with her entire days devoted to her writing, where she read the paper first thing in the morning, cooked meals for the family, and spent the rest of the day reading writing instruction books on her bed with a highlighter, and immediately applied the writing principles to her novel, her monument of love for her awesome relationship with Brent. Some days she'd taken off on research assignments to visit synagogues and take notes for scene descriptions or for characterization. She'd visit synagogue libraries to research Judaism and bought some of the books in the synagogue libraries to assist her as she wrote about her lead Silver Skies character, Dor Ben Habakkuk. Or she'd drive to Meyerland, where Brent grew up, and take notes about the landscaping and surroundings there to assist her to flesh out her novel so she could honor Brent by writing about his hometown. She relished the fact that she lived in Brent's hometown and saw this as a real opportunity to write a novel to honor him. When inspiration struck her, as she lay on her bed and took notes from her writing instruction books, she jumped to her computer and write. From the summer of 1993 until the summer of 1996, she worked on her novel just about every day. In June 1996, she was about 120,000 words into her novel. Every time she got in her car, from June 1991 to the time she learned about Laurie in June 1996, she plopped her copy of Brent's Old Yellow Eyes Is Back into her car's cassette player and listened to him sing his love songs for her. His music made her intimate with him. She chose the car to listen to his music because her husband couldn't hear what she played in her car. So as she sat on the sofa in her little 2-bedroom apartment in Webster, Texas, and read the Houston Chronicle on June 26, 1996, as she'd done every day since she arrived in Houston in July 1994, and saw the name of Brent's mother Sylvia mentioned in the paper, her heart always jumped when she saw Sylvia's name in the Houston Chronicle's Society column, because she wanted to know everything about Brent, and Sylvia always talked about Brent in the paper. This Houston paper always had a Society column that reported the latest gossip on all the celebrities that hailed from the Houston area. Houston, proud of its celebrities, reported on them from its local paper. The huge Houston newspaper took her an hour or longer to read. On that morning of June 26, 1996, Gail read in the Houston Chronicle Society column Sylvia's comments. Brent had a huge birthday dinner for his girlfriend Laurie McBride at Spago's, and boy, was it some celebration. Gail's heart about dropped to the ground and died. She'd already forgotten about the cute blonde incident she brought up to Brent the previous night. After Laurie knocked Brent out with a fry pan over his head, she dragged Brent down to his home's basement, literally throwing him down the stairs. Using his stolen credit cards, she arranged to have a big birthday bash for herself at Spago's in L.A., but Brent wasn't invited. However, Laurie coordinated with the Houston Chronicle to have the lie published in the paper that his mother gushed about the birthday bash. Laurie knew that Gail read the Houston Chronicle from listening to Gail on Brent's wiretap. Gail immediately ran to her wiretapped phone and read word for word the article that she had just read in the Houston Chronicle. "I want to know why you have this girlfriend. What do you need a girlfriend for? You mean I'm not good enough? There's something going on here that I don't know. Why do you have this woman for your girlfriend?" And then she screamed at him, "How dare you have a girlfriend when I've literally worshipped the ground you walk on and have written a novel to honor our love? How could you do this to me? How dare you? How dare you?" She cried on the phone for at least a half hour and said nothing, just cried her heart out on the phone. "I'm going to go to the floor and spend all day for the next month in prayer for you because something's not right here. I know this woman does not love you, and I know you don't love her, and I can't understand why you have this girlfriend." She tried to get some answers from him about why he had her, but he'd never talked to her, just made noises on the phone. About all Gail could garner from the noises he made in answer to her questions was that he had some sort of deal with Laurie, and that this girlfriend understood his feelings for Gail and respected his feelings for Gail. But Gail couldn't understand why he felt he needed to have this girlfriend. About the only thing Gail could figure was that he was ashamed to admit in public that he loved Gail, and so he had her to protect his image. When Gail came to this conclusion, it devastated her that she had devoted her entire life to him since May 1991, and that it appeared her feelings for him were deeper than his for Gail. She couldn't understand how he could ever think she'd find his girlfriend acceptable, because she risked her life, marriage, and moral standards to maintain communications with him. She then asked him, "I thought about possible marriage to you, but it appears that marriage has never entered your mind, or you wouldn't have this girlfriend. How could you treat my feelings for you so lightly? How could you have me and this other woman at the same time?" So she cried her heart out and cried and screamed at Brent and demanded an explanation from him. He told her nothing. He never talked to her after she received the FedEx letter in January 1994. Just made a bunch of noises on her phone to let her know he was there. As she mulled over this new knowledge in her mind, she threw up a bit in her kitchen sink. In spite of her iron stomach, and that she hadn't thrown up in over 20 years, since around 1974. To think she dreamed of him as her hero for years, and that he listened to her on the phone for hours on end, and he had a girlfriend the whole time. To think she risked her marriage when she had no job to keep her communication with him for years. So for a month, July 1996, she cried every day and prayed flat and face down on her apartment's floor, and her emotions so drained her that sleep fled. She asked God for strength to go on. The brightness in her heart had turned to despair and confusion, because she couldn't tell anyone, except Brent and God, why devastation now darkened her life, and why for a month in July 1996 she couldn't stop crying. Once Brent came to and realized Gail now knew about Laurie because of the lying statement in the Houston Chronicle, Laurie pulled Brent over to the kitchen table, and this time she showed him concentration camp photos with Gail's body in them, mutilated, bloodied, raped, and like pieces of steak. When Laurie did this before with Brent in July 1993, Gail wasn't in the photos. What Laurie showed Brent in July 1993 just looked like the concentration camp photos you saw in Jack Chick's book Smokescreens. Now, 3 years later, Gail was in the photos, mutilated and raped. You better make public appearances all over the place, admitting I'm your girlfriend, or Gail will be like in these photos, Laurie snarled. Apparently, the Jesuits made a clone of Gail and butchered her and took pictures just for this event to ensure Brent would change his contract at Paramount and allow Laurie to make public appearances with her. Brent was able to somewhat successfully avoid Laurie from summer 1994 after the Star Trek The Next Generation television series wrapped up to about spring 1996 by living in Texas near Gail in his mother's apartment. That is, until he had to live in L.A. all the time to film for Star Trek First Contact in 1996. The Texas police seemed more cooperative than the L.A. police. Though he wanted to get out of his Paramount contract, he needed the money too badly. It didn't help that Laurie kept stealing his credit cards and using the cards she stole from him as his wife. He also felt he needed a large, expensive L.A. house, more room to get away from Laurie. Fortunately, when Gail read this article about Brent's girlfriend, her husband was out at sea and not due back for a month. So confused about God's plan for her life, it didn't make sense to her at all why God seemed to tell her that Brent was part of his plan for her life if Brent had this shallow girlfriend. She, who yearned for Brent's presence in her life from 1993 to June 26, 1996, envied this cute blonde when she read about her in data entries for only one thing, that Laurie could be in the presence of her hero and Gail could not. It seemed so unfair because Gail sensed this cute blonde lacked the depth and discernment to appreciate Brent's greatness and that she didn't deserve his presence. Gail felt the blonde poisoned him because she made him jumpy and nervous. Gail knew that she brought Brent wholeness and completeness. Laurie's looks and fame didn't faze Gail. It just seemed so unfair that Laurie could have Brent's presence and fly with him on jets to Star Trek conventions when Gail wanted more than her life to give Brent her presence to infuse him into greatness. Gail sensed, from what she'd gleaned about Laurie in data entries, that Laurie had no comprehension of Brent's soul, did not care about what moved him, and did nothing to inspire him to greatness. It seemed outrageous to Gail that this cute blonde, incapable of understanding the depths of Brent Spiner, or else she wouldn't make him so nervous, could have the honor of his presence, when she seemed to have no clue about the vastness Gail knew lodged in his heart. Gail knew Brent could never feel intimate with a woman who delighted in making appearances with him at Star Trek conventions. His desire for privacy about his love life Gail respected. This indicated to Gail he had depth of feeling. This glitter queen had too much ostentation to grasp the depths of Brent Spiner. Now that Gail knew Brent paraded with the blonde named Laurie McBride as his girlfriend, and that her occupation was publicist, Gail thought perhaps she overestimated Brent's depths and greatness. She knew Brent didn't love Laurie because he had too much depth to love a woman who delighted in parading her relationship with him to the tabloids. So Gail cried for hours on the phone with him and pounded him with questions about Laurie McBride. He wouldn't tell her much and never talked to her now, only made noises on her phone. While Gail was crying her eyes out, Laurie was jumping up and down on her bed in Brent's house. She slept in a separate room from Brent. Unfortunately, by the time Brent started filming for Star Trek First Contact in the spring of 1996, Laurie decided to move in since Brent could no longer live in Texas to get away from her. Listening to Brent's wiretap noises on Gail's phone was a lousy way to communicate with Gail at such a momentous time in her life, but Gail was married at the time and knew her husband stood between her and Brent. About all Gail could discern from the noises he made and the questions she asked him was that Laurie somehow extorted him into a relationship with her, but Gail got no details about it. She could only conclude that he must be a coward because he allowed this woman to extort her way into a relationship with him when Gail felt he should have stood up to her. Gail sensed that Laurie ruled over Brent and manipulated him, and Gail despised him for allowing this showgirl to invade their sanctuary in that he gave her public girlfriend status. For a month, Gail cried her eyes out to him on the phone and averaged about 3 or 4 hours of sleep for several weeks. She became depressed. Her sleep problems not licked, she felt perhaps her manic depression had returned, and she'd started Ambien, a new sleeping pill, in the middle of June and didn't realize it, but one of the side effects of that tranquilizer was depression. When she realized that the Ambien brought on her depression and a lot of her insomnia as a result of that depression, she quit taking it in mid-July 1996. Then her depression vanished and her sleep returned. She weathered this emotional storm with incredible strength. Despite her despair and confusion, she knew God had a plan. In July 1996, she spent hours and hours every day on the floor of the bedroom in her Webster apartment, with tears and confusion to God, who seemed to tell her in September 1992 that he had a plan and future for Brent and her. So face down on the floor with her head buried into the carpet and with her hands spread out as she pleaded in prayer to God for hours and hours every day to receive clarity about how she should respond to Brent Spiner's girlfriend. It seemed all she could do was cry and pray, because this man who had so transformed her life and who inspired her to write and almost finish Silver Skies, and who gave her the courage to climb the mountaintop as a writer, was not the hero she thought he was. Perhaps the Jesuits timed the release of this newspaper article about Brent because they hoped she'd become so devastated about Brent and Laurie that she'd commit suicide or do something drastic. The Jesuits had her on Ambien that induced depression at the time. However, she, like Catherine the Great, was strong, and though she cried her eyes out, she did much better when she quit taking that tranquilizer, and then her sleep returned. Besides, no matter what Gail said about Laurie, and though she challenged Brent if this girlfriend mattered, to drop his wiretap of her phone, he wouldn't do that. So Gail decided to keep him as a friend, and he seemed to want this. Her communications with Brent continued, but the nature of their relationship changed because she now knew about Laurie. No longer Gail's hero, Brent became to Gail a cowardly Hollywood actor who didn't have the courage to honor the depths of his heart, or perhaps was too shallow to appreciate a vast love. After Gail learned about Laurie, the romantic feelings she had for Brent weakened every day until they vanished to nothing. It didn't help that Laurie paraded around as the young and pretty cute blonde. Gail discerned she was about 10 years younger than her and thought to herself, she just loves to go around and flaunt her youthful good looks and her bright sparkly eyes and wear those mini skirts to show off her legs and uses teeth whitener to make herself look like a Hollywood glamour girl. I can tell she loves to be photographed with him, so unlike myself. I desire to love him in private and stay away from the crowds. She's obviously shallow. She thinks just because she's younger than I that Brent would prefer her to me. She takes advantage of the fact that I've kept my relationship with Brent very private, and she has gone real public about her relationship with Brent to make it look like he never called me and talked to me on my phone. She obviously knows all about me and is in competition with me and loves to show off all her pretty clothes, her pretty legs, her pretty eyes, and the fact that she's 10 years younger than me, like she thinks all Brent cares about is pretty young girls. This doesn't seem like Brent at all. I'm so confused. Brent doesn't act like he's in love with her, so I don't get it. Why is he parading around with this shallow, pretty young thing who obviously can't understand his depths and intelligence and who obviously loves the limelight and to be associated with this very private celebrity? This is so unlike the Brent I love. It doesn't make sense. I thought he had more depth than this. I thought he was shy and private about his personal life, and he parades around with this glitter queen, so ostentatious and flagrant as his girlfriend. I bet when she gets to my age, she won't look half as good as me. She looks like some shallow 20-something who doesn't know who she is or what she needs in love. The fact that Brent hangs around with her makes me really wonder about his manliness and courage. He's obviously not in love with her. She's too ostentatious and shallow to be a woman he could love. I thought Brent was a manly Texan with depth and sensitivity. In fact, this whole Laurie charade disgusted Gail, so that from August 1996 to December 1999, she never dreamed about Brent any more in any romantic fashion. She relegated him to friendship status, as if he'd never consumed her days. From 1991 to 1996, her romantic feelings for him in her heart vanished. When she saw his photos in the internet in late August 1996 and forward, she could tell her decision to drop Brent as a romantic interest devastated him. But then he devastated her by having Laurie McBride. So Gail felt justified to shove all romantic thoughts of him from her heart. At this time, Gail did not realize Laurie was the same crude woman who called Gail in July 1993 and screamed at her, "Hey, bitch, what the fuck are you doing with my boyfriend?" If Gail had known this, she may have discerned that Laurie was a criminal and Brent her victim, and she may have, despite her, retained Brent as a romantic interest. But the Jesuits doctored up Laurie's internet photos to make her appear nicer than she was, and Gail thought Brent just had her to protect his image and to placate Paramount. Gail knew Laurie was his publicity girlfriend because her occupation was advertised as publicist, and that he had no deep feelings for her. And Gail thought if his image so concerned him that he felt he needed a publicity girlfriend, then he didn't have enough backbone, depth, and moral courage to interest her. She felt she somehow overestimated his manliness and greatness, and now no longer had enough respect for him to retain any romantic interest in him. She wasn't sure she could pull herself together before her husband came back from sea duty, but when she got off the tranquilizer Ambien, she did better. She changed to a different medication and to a different psychiatrist. The first psychiatrist she saw in Houston was Vincent Privatera, 560 Blossom Suite A, Webster, Texas, 77598. But he retired and she had to find a new doctor. Gail liked Dr. Privatera, but he retired. Bel Air psychiatrist Michael Leesom, 6750 West Loop South, Bel Air, Texas, 77401. In the Park National Bank Building, telephone 713-665-6446, put Gail on Ambien around May 1996. Gail went to Dr. Leesom just for the novelty of having a psychiatrist in the town where Brent grew up. But when she called Dr. Leesom during his off hours to complain about the side effects from Ambien, he got irritated because she called him when he was not at his office and apparently interrupted him in the middle of lovemaking with his girlfriend. He just snuffed her off, irritated that she disturbed him during sex, and so Gail dropped him and went to see Harry Louis Faust in Webster, where she lived. Gail remained with Dr. Faust until she left Houston in 1997. With any of her psychiatrists, Gail never discussed Brent Spiner or Laurie McBride. She only went to them because they gave her the medicines that helped her sleep. Despite her loss of respect for Brent, She still tried to protect his communications with her on her wiretap phone, and told no one that Brent had wiretapped her phone and listened to her every day. She told herself to keep on writing, that the novel needed an ending. And she did work on it for a couple of months following the schedule she'd maintained over the years to work on it. But by December 1996, it just sat there. She couldn't put soul into the writing because the characters and the storyline lacked urgency for her now. She lost her passion for the story. That novel was her monument of love for Brent, and she'd written it to make it up to him that she couldn't give him her body. Now that she felt he didn't deserve this monument, she lost interest in it. And it's funny that when her husband returned from sea duty in August 1996, David decided to get the internet. This was the first time Gail had the internet. So in the middle of August 1996, Gail had the internet, and of course, she scoured the internet to see what she could learn about Brent and Laurie McBride. She studied Laurie's face and discerned she had unusual physical beauty, but she could tell Laurie lacked her depth or intelligence. Gail noticed as she read the internet that Brent made more television appearances to publicize his girlfriend relationship with Laurie, and that he did this in July 1996 while Gail was devastated about Laurie and thought she'd die, and that he committed these distasteful public appearances about Laurie when Gail needed his reassurance about his commitment toward her as the love of his life. Gail never doubted that he had feelings for her. What she doubted was his commitment to her. Gail felt that he didn't have the courage to be true to his heart, and she despised him for his cowardice, to the point that he became unattractive to her as a lover. So, while she cried her eyes out in July 1996 about Laurie, he had the gall to make public appearances to admit on national television that Laurie McBride was his girlfriend, and he did this while she averaged about 3 hours of sleep a day because she was so devastated about Laurie's intrusion into their sanctuary. This really insulted her. This really made her doubt his manliness and his honor. She couldn't forgive him for this. Now that she had seen the blonde's photo and realized she came nowhere near Gail in depth, maturity, or intelligence, Gail wasn't depressed about Laurie as Brent's girlfriend. She was disgusted. She then read on the internet that he made national television appearances where he gloated about Laurie and her 2 dogs on national television, where he acted as if Gail had never stirred a string of his heart, as if he'd never spoken to her with longings on her telephone in 1991, 1992, and 1993. So Gail read on the internet that on national television in July 1996, when Gail thought she'd die, he talked about his girlfriend Laurie and her 2 dogs. She lost all respect for him after this. That did it. Gail always encouraged him to be private about his love for her, because she felt it tacky to be public about a truly great love, that something this awesome should be private because it was too great, too awesome to be tarnished by the press and the tabloids. And now he brazenly advertised his relationship with this glitter-box blonde, as if he could care less about the great and inspiring love she'd infused into him. She knew that he could understand and appreciate a great and awesome love, or he wouldn't have wasted all his time to listen to her and her writings and her work in progress, Silver Skies, for hours on end from 1991 to now. So she could only conclude that he was a coward, and too much of a coward for her. She decided this man had no respect for how greatly she loved him and how much of her time and life that she'd invested into him over the years, that she needed to find a replacement for him, some fantasy hero who she could use to still inspire her to finish her book. She'd already become a different person, a person more true to her real self that he'd helped her to find. She'd become a dreamer of great heights and one who had found greatness within herself. If Brent was not the great man she thought, she still believed she'd find that great man, even if only in her imagination. And she determined that this greatness that infused her would live on, even if only in her imagination, because it made her better even if she could never find this great man in this life. Far better to dream about greatness than to continue a relationship with a man not great. She determined that she would only have a great man for her lover and would settle for nothing less, even if that lover could only be in her imagination. She couldn't go back to what she was before Brent's music transformed her soul in June 1991. Laurie appeared self-centered, whose only motive to be with Brent was to show off. If Brent associated with her, she cheapened him, and he lacked greatness to associate with this woman who seemed shallow, clamorous, and no companion of greatness. She seemed to delight in public appearances with him. Gail did not think her a criminal, but knew Brent didn't love her. Gail knew Laurie didn't inspire Brent to dream noble thoughts or reach for the heavens, as Gail thought she'd done for him. Perhaps he really was as jaded as he claimed in some magazine articles, and if this was the case, he would depart from the reins of her heart because she refused to allow someone this inferior to reign with her in her romantic fantasies. She would relegate him to some inferior friendship status. She couldn't understand why he had Laurie, or why he felt he had to advertise this inferior woman as his girlfriend, as if he could care less about the greatness he inspired in her and how he inspired her to find the courage and vastness within her and to nurture it, and how the greatness she sensed in him inspired her to forge mountain tops and to attempt to write a masterpiece to honor him. So now, he paraded around with this shallow and self-centered young thing, as if Gail was just some entertainment for him, as if he was not committed to Gail for anything more than to be entertained by her voice on his phone, even though she'd risked her life and marriage and had transformed her entire life to maintain her communications with him. If his public image so obsessed him that he was ashamed of Gail, but not ashamed of his shallow and self-centered girlfriend, so that he could avoid a scandal because of his love for Gail, then he was too much of a coward for her. Gail saw none of the soft effervescence of love in the way he looked at her. In fact, he never looked at her. Gail noticed this in all their internet photos together. Of course, Gail was unaware that most of those photos were doctored. The only photos of Brent with Laurie that were accurate were those where he looked miserable with her. Most of those vanished from the internet. Gail decided that both Brent and Laurie were mentally ill and incapable of greatness in love or anything. His relationship with her seemed strange and unhealthy, and Gail figured that he and she had some sort of mental illness that prevented them from happiness or depth in relationships, and that he was addicted to Gail but lacked the courage to be a great lover. So Gail played a bunch of movies to find solace for her disappointed heart, to find a hero in her imaginations to replace Brent. Her real-life hero, the imaginary Brent she'd conjured in her mind, had just been a figment of her glorious imagination. He was not the hero she thought he was, so she decided to create her own fantasy hero to replace him, and to use this hero to give her the motivation to finish her book. But it didn't work, because in Silver Skies, she'd created a hero too much like Brent Spiner, and so she lost interest in Silver Skies and dropped it after December 1996. The reality about Brent slapped her in the face. Brent was not great, so he was not worthy to be the main character of her glorious book. Dor Ben Habakkuk, the hero she'd created in Silver Skies, was not Brent, could never be Brent, and Brent was so far below Dor Ben Habakkuk, Brent did not deserve Silver Skies, so Gail didn't want to work on this book anymore. Brent, no longer her hero, made Gail search for a new hero, even if only a fantasy hero. Gail did not plan to reinstate her husband onto the throne of her heart, because her husband did not deserve the throne, and Gail still had more respect for Brent than her husband, despite Laurie, because Gail did determine one thing about Brent, that he was generous with his time with her. If he only wanted friendship, He was a generous friend. Brent had shown Gail that her husband did not love her, and Gail wondered if Brent loved her or if any man could love her. But Gail wouldn't settle for her husband. Her husband could not be her fantasy lover. Gail knew her husband was not great, and that she had to move on, even if she moved on without Brent or without her husband. Gail had grown by leaps and bounds because of her relationship with Brent, and had taught herself professional writing skills, and had allowed herself to grow as a person. Now, a new person, she couldn't throw all this away because Brent disappointed her in love. True to the greatness she discovered in herself, even if she could find no greatness in others, Brent had shown Gail she had greatness within, and she determined to honor this newfound knowledge about herself. Perhaps she exceeded Brent. Perhaps if all he did was to show her through her dreams and fantasies that she could find greatness in writings and from within, he did her the best favor of all, even if he disappointed her in love. Gail told Brent that his association with Laurie cheapened him and did not do him honor as a man, because a man should have depth, substance, and commitment. She told him on his wiretap of her phone that she could not understand why he felt he needed Laurie as a girlfriend. Was not Gail enough? Wasn't he honored enough that Gail wrote a novel to honor their love? Gail read to him every day about the work she did on the great novel inspired by their love. So why did he need Laurie? Gail felt Brent didn't deserve all the time and effort she put into her labor of love for him. Silver skies. She couldn't believe her eyes as she read the paper on June 26, 1996. But here it was in the paper. It couldn't be denied. And it was his own mother who revealed this horror to her. Yes, it was true. That cute blonde was Brent Spiner's girlfriend. He had a girlfriend while he courted Gail on the phone and while she devoted every minute of her life to honor him. She felt betrayed and couldn't understand how Brent could feel that Gail would find his girlfriend acceptable. She didn't find this girlfriend arrangement acceptable. She found it nauseating. If he felt he had to keep her to keep Gail, well, it wouldn't work, because she no longer found Brent attractive. Obviously, he thought it acceptable, because he had her as his girlfriend. Gail knew that he couldn't adore her, not if he listened to Gail for hours and hours on the phone. It made no sense at all. Gail was so confused. It didn't seem at all like the man who sang love songs to her in Brent's album that she listened to every day until June 26, 1996. Did he mean it when he sang, "When I fall in love, it will be forever, or I'll never fall in love"? You mean he's such a good actor he could swoon her with love songs where he sang words that had no meaning to him personally, to him when he sang them, or else he wouldn't have had Laurie while she adored him every day on her wiretapped phone? And it wasn't like they fought every day from 1991 to 1996. They had an excellent relationship and had become emotionally intimate in every way. So she couldn't understand why he had Laurie. In fact, she only got mad at him about once a year. She didn't know how she should respond about Laurie. But her respect for Brent flew out the window, because it just didn't seem like him at all to have this girlfriend. Gail knew Laurie couldn't come close to her, and that he had inferior reasons for having her, so Gail lost a lot of respect for him. He was not the man she thought he was. She'd fallen in love with a delusion, with some imaginary hero, not the real Brent Spiner. The real Brent Spiner, a coward, lacked the courage and substance to deserve the noble and heroic feelings she had for him since 1991. Day by day, after Gail learned about Laurie in June 1996, she lost respect for him. Because she could not have romantic feelings for a man she had no respect for, her romantic feelings for him weakened more with every day, the more she learned about Laurie. He now seemed some shallow and cowardly playboy, and Gail was so confused. How could Brent spend so much time listening to Gail for hours and hours and have this girlfriend? How could he not understand that Gail would never betray her deep-rooted moral convictions or her husband over a shallow fling or over a friendship? Because if she had known that all Brent wanted was friendship, and that he was not committed to her as the love of his life, she never would have given Brent such prominence in her time, life, or thoughts, especially because her husband felt very threatened by him. It made no sense at all. Gail always thought Brent had more depth than this. And Brent never spoke to Gail on the phone anymore after January 1994, just made all these weird noises on her landline phone when she picked it up. This was his way of communicating with her. It was a communication that was not very clear because he never used words with her anymore. So in her Webster apartment, June 26, 1996, Gail read in the Houston Chronicle from its society column that Brent's mother Sylvia stated that her son Brent hosted a big birthday dinner for his girlfriend Lori McBride at Spago's in Hollywood, and Sylvia said it was quite a celebration. Brent informed his mother what Lori did to her, and Sylvia was horrified that despite all her efforts, Lori had betrayed her and wrote this lie in the Houston Chronicle that she, Sylvia, who hated Lori McBride, was gloating over a birthday party that Brent supposedly staged for his girlfriend from hell. Gail's whole motivation for living changed after she learned about Lori. No longer was Brent Spiner her son. He was her disillusionment. But if she managed to get this star interested in her, even if only as a devoted long-distance lover who quickly lost interest in her and got a regular girlfriend, perhaps she could find another star who would not treat her noble feelings with such disdain. After several weeks of endless tears, she watched a bunch of movies to console herself and was drawn to Camelot. Gail liked how Franco Nero sang If Ever I Would Leave You. With her unique talent to be able to read an actor, despite his portrayals on the screen, she perceived that perhaps Franco could take Brent's place. Listening to Franco Nero sing If Ever I Would Leave You, even though his voice was dubbed, gave her comfort. It was a song about commitment. She didn't know Franco's voice was dubbed at the time, so she listened to it over and over for about a week, and then decided to transfer her dreams and affections to Italian film star Franco Nero, August 1996. And instead of sharing all her life with Brent on the phone like she used to, Gail shared with Brent her fantasies about Franco's manliness and how Franco seemed to have all the manliness that Gail perceived Brent lacked. Gail perceived that Brent had this girlfriend for reasons other than love, and that he was a coward, because how could he love Lori if he listened to Gail make love to him all day on the phone for years and years? Gail knew there was something she didn't know that she needed to know, and though she was disgusted with Brent, she perceived he still deserved her friendship. So she kept him as her friend, but told him never to expect marriage from her or to expect any romance from her any more, and that if he dared to speak any romantic words to her or to encourage any romance with her, that he would insult the noble and highest feelings she had for him over the years. To dare to mention romance with her when she risked her life and honor to love him would insult the greatness of her feelings for him since 1991. So if he dared to talk romantic to her again, he would insult her beyond words, and that he was not to expect any romance from her ever again, that she'd transferred her affections to Franco Nero, and she threw Brent out of all her romantic fantasies, and Franco Nero became her new hero. She told Brent that maybe after a year she'd try to contact Franco and see if he was interested, but that in the meanwhile she'd dream about Franco. Damn, Lori fumed that Gail had not kicked Brent off her phone, because Lori knew that Gail knew Brent had a wiretap on her phone. Gail recuperated about Lori McBride by August 1996 because she'd transferred her affections to Franco, and her husband returned from his sea duty. She also suffered writer's block because her sole purpose for writing Silver Skies was to honor her love for Brent, and now she didn't want to write Silver Skies anymore because Brent didn't deserve it. So she just lost interest in it, and it sat in her closet. Brent jumped the gun about her newfound interest in Franco, and made the introductions for her right away. Gail figured it out in early September 1996, though Brent was heartbroken, that Gail transferred her romantic feelings to Franco. He thought Gail would be safer with Franco and felt relieved for Gail's safety. Also, with Gail's interest in Franco, she'd need the wiretap to communicate with Franco, and so she wouldn't kick Brent off her wiretap, and Brent could still make sure Gail would be okay. In September 1996, Gail perceived that Brent had added Franco to her phone's wiretap. And Franco supplied his email on the internet, so Gail knew Franco was interested in her. But Gail didn't feel it wise to contact Franco via email because he could hear from her on her wiretap phone, so Gail didn't use Franco's email. Gail knew her husband could never replace Brent, that she needed another artist, another great soul in her life to replace what Brent had been to her. So she transferred her affections to Italian film star Franco Nero. But in Gail's subconscious, she could never forget Brent. Gail turned to writing to find a way to let the world know about this awesome thing that happened to her, to communicate it somehow. Writing was her catharsis because she couldn't talk about her love for Brent. Her Christian friends would have condemned her. She knew Brent would be misunderstood, that nobody could understand, that Brent wasn't just some sex maniac who called her on the phone, that he really was a deeper person than that. She was so afraid for him, so afraid that her Christian friends would not be as gracious, tolerant, and forgiving with Brent as she felt he deserved. That's why she didn't talk about him to anybody, because she knew his outward actions made him look very bad. But she knew the man. She was very good at reading people. She knew that he was a good person, that he wasn't shallow. And yes, it's true, he had a brilliant sense of humor. He made her laugh so many times when he went on talk shows. She thought he was so funny. She had quite a sense of humor herself. Brent was very funny because when he called her on the phone, like she heard Gates McFadden on the phone one time, she said, "Duh," and Gail could tell that this was meant to be funny. Gail could tell, whoever this caller was, they were very witty and funny. He used very humorous methods to communicate with her. Sometimes it was borderline crude, but never cruel. Gail never sensed any cruelty in Brent. The nature of his phone calls to her indicated that whoever this caller was, they had the personality of Brent Spiner, very witty, charming, which was what most of his friends and acquaintances knew about him. There was a side to him that a lot of people didn't know about. Not only was he witty and charming, he was the ultimate in finesse and sensitivity. He knew when it was proper to joke and when it was proper to be serious. He had a very fine-tuned sense of appropriateness, of knowing when he should be compassionate or when he should be witty. Underneath that humorous exterior, Gail thought one of the reasons he was so witty was this was his way of coping with pain. It worked real well for him, and he was genuinely funny. But Gail could tell that there was more to the man than his sense of humor. Because of the way he talked to her and made love to her on the phone, she never heard such depth of feeling, such emotional sensitivity and intelligence. She could tell, whoever this mystery caller was, he was highly intelligent and very quick on his feet. He caught on very quick to anything that she communicated with him. It didn't take him long to figure out how her emotional health was. He was very in tune to her emotions. He always seemed to handle her emotions with the utmost finesse. He always seemed to have an uncanny ability to know exactly how to keep Gail calm, how to make her feel important to him, and how to nurture her when he sensed she was down. Gail never smoked a cigarette her whole life. She'd never been drunk. The most alcohol that she drank her whole life was 2 sips of a beer, and she concluded that it tasted terrible, and she wasn't going to waste her time with this stuff. And she never used illegal drugs. Gail was saved, became born again, when she was 14 years old, and she concluded that it was not wise to mess with narcotics, drinking, or cigarettes. And she never messed with any of those things. It tended to make her self-righteous. Gail felt that was one of the biggest reasons God allowed Brent Spiner into her life, to make her realize that she should be more gracious and lenient in judging others for their fleshly sins. That was something he had to work on in her so he could use her. And he used Brent Spiner because Brent did smoke and he did drink. That was quite a feat for God to show Gail that you cannot always judge people by outward appearances. Because she learned with Brent Spiner that even though he may have had some bad habits, even though he may not have had a perfect past, Gail was sure he had sex before marriage, that God looked at the heart, that there was more to Christianity than following rules and regulations. While Gail was wise not to smoke or drink or use narcotics, it should not give her cause for pride against her fellow man, which she used to be like. God had to work really hard to chisel that self-righteous pride out of Gail's life, and Brent Spiner was the instrument he used. Another instrument God used to take self-righteousness out of Gail's life was David Schuler. David Schuler didn't drink, smoke, and he followed all the rules. He went to church regularly, but Gail discovered from her marriage to David Schuler that just because you didn't drink, smoke, and were regular in church attendance, and you followed all the rules, there was something more important than the letter of the law, and that was the spirit. It was your attitude. It was who you were on the inside. Gail learned through Brent Spiner that more important than a good outward appearance was a good heart. Because she sensed Brent had a good heart, she could not betray him. Gail could not allow him to be the victim of the world's stereotypes about Hollywood celebrities. Gail was married to a man who followed all the rules religiously. Every time the church door was open, he was there. He never drank alcohol. He never smoked. But Gail never saw power in prayer in his life. He never showed compassion toward her when she was in pain. He thought it was a sin to be compassionate. He was obsessed about outward appearances, but not about the real thing. He seemed more concerned with what everyone thought about him than with what he was like in private. Very rarely did he show Gail compassion when he hurt her feelings. He'd usually try to make it up to her, but it was more like he glossed over it and pretended like he didn't do anything. When he broke her heart or did something to hurt her feelings because of his insensitivity, that's one reason Gail turned to Brent Spiner. Brent was the total opposite. Brent Spiner showed Gail that there were men in this world who were sensitive. Gail never really grew up with men. She grew up in a female family. When she was a young lady, there was a lot about men she didn't understand, and she was a victim of a lot of stereotypes about men. As a result of her experiences with Brent and David, she formed a more realistic picture of the male sex, to the point that she understood them very thoroughly. She wanted to have a good marriage so bad that she chose a man who fit a list. She made a list of qualities that she wanted in a husband. David fit everything on that list. So Gail thought she was safe. She found a man who went to church regularly. He didn't smoke. He didn't have sex before marriage, premarital sex. Gail asked him that on a date. He told her he hadn't had premarital sex. It was important to Gail. Gail was tired of going out with all these guys who'd gone to bed with women before marriage. And Gail knew she had saved herself for her husband, and she wanted a man who was willing to do the same for her. And she thought that was very important. So that's what she looked for before she married David. And she found him in David, so she thought. And she got him as a husband. And you know what? It wasn't as good a deal as she thought it would be. Yes, he didn't have sex before marriage. When they made love, there was no depth of feeling, no passion. It was like making love to a machine. When he kissed her, it was like kissing the wall. So Gail was married to a frigid man. The first year of marriage, the sexual experience, because she hadn't had it before, was thrilling for her, because she did love her husband. But after the first year, he started breaking her heart, when he always preferred the preacher over her. She started distancing herself from him. She began to realize he didn't care when he broke her heart, that he didn't care when he made her cry all night and she couldn't sleep because he hurt her. He wouldn't patch it up. He'd just forget it and pretend he hadn't done anything, or he'd try to make it up in some sorry way. He seemed to think it was a sin to show her kindness and sensitivity. That was one of the reasons she started writing Brent Spiner. Brent seemed to be loaded with the qualities her husband lacked. But by the time she got around to writing Brent, Gail decided that all those things that she, as a single girl, thought were so important in a man, that he had the criteria of a list. He didn't smoke, drink, or have premarital sex. That, yes, having high standards was important, but it was also important to have the right spirit, to show forgiveness, generosity, and to have a lot of love in your heart. And apparently when Gail dated David Schuler, she didn't put enough emphasis on the qualities that weren't so easily seen. Gail began to realize that just because someone goes to church all the time, and they lived the outwardly exemplary Christian life, did not mean they're an outstanding Christian. It was at the Sotera Revival in 1991 at Open Door Baptist Church in Linwood, Washington, that God showed Gail that the greatest quality a Christian can have was humility, which was one thing David Schuler did not have. He was too proud to get things right between Gail and him when he hurt her, and when someone else caused Gail pain, especially if it was a preacher, he always took the preacher's side over her. Why? Because he wanted everyone to think he was spiritual. In order to make himself look spiritual, he had to make Gail look like, as an excuse. For his spiritual failings, David used Gail as his excuse. He couldn't go to the mission field because Gail blocked him. He couldn't be the great Christian he needed to be because his wife held him back. Gail was his convenient excuse for his spiritual failings. Gail was tired of playing that role. She was tired of his performance and his lying. Gail discovered he was a liar too, and he was good at it. He put on a good spiritual performance, and Gail was quite turned off towards him. That's why she fell for Brent Spiner. Brent was the total opposite of her husband in that respect. He was more concerned about being the genuine article than in appearing to be that way. And that's what Gail loved about him. That's why she so viciously defended him, because she respected him for that. Because in private with her, he was always the utmost in finesse and sensitivity, and he was more concerned with giving her emotional support when she was in trouble than he was in his own reputation. Gail thought what a contrast Brent Spiner was to her husband. She felt like she'd die for that guy. She didn't know there was such a guy on this planet. She thought, how ironic that this man who gave her such incredible emotional support was world famous, probably a millionaire, probably not a Christian, and yet when it came to emotional support and sensitivity and just being a kind, caring, generous, and loving human being, Brent made Gail's husband David Schuler look sick. What was even more ironic was Brent didn't have to give Gail emotional support. Gail didn't promise him marriage. The only thing she could give him was her companionship through letters, tapes, and videos. Gail didn't promise him sex. She didn't give him any money. The only thing she could offer him was her companionship through writing, through words. And she found that that meant everything to him. And he didn't give her any money. The only thing he could offer her was emotional support and a good listening and ready ear. And Gail found that meant everything to her. It was funny. Gail realized that all the things she thought were so important, going to church regular, playing the game, being on time to all your appointments, Gail was not saying these things weren't important. But she found what really mattered to her were the things the world never noticed. The time to smell a flower, to notice the beauty of a sunset or a sunrise. He taught her to slow down and smell the flowers, to enjoy the beauty of life, to express it with her art, to meditate, and think on why she was here on this planet and what her purpose was for living. If you want a real example of how Gail felt about Brent, read Silver Skies or her short story, Emerald Towers. Gail had to find a way to communicate the awesome effect that Brent had on her. She knew there were a lot of stereotypes about Hollywood celebrities, and she could tell that Brent Spiner broke just about every stereotype. So Gail was not pleased when she heard about him hanging around this blonde. Gail called her a blonde because this was how she was always described. She had nothing against blondes. The impression Gail got about her was she made him nervous, and Gail thought Laurie didn't have the effect on him that she did. She knew that she brought him some calmness, some soothing, because when he talked to her on the phone from 1991 to 1993, even though he may have been a little nervous at first because he opened his heart to her, she never sensed she made him nervous. She sensed she made him feel whole, complete. She felt more comfortable emotionally and in every way with Brent Spiner, this world-famous celebrity, than she did the people at the church she went to. Because with Brent there were no barriers. He accepted her the way she was. At her church, she felt reluctant to divulge everything about herself. She was afraid there were some areas they wouldn't understand or that they would find threatening. With Brent, he didn't find anything about her threatening, and she didn't find anything about him threatening. They were totally at ease with each other. If he was totally at ease with her, then why didn't he talk to her on the phone? She presumed that was because she was married, so she understood. She was very patient with him, because he hardly ever spoke to her. Brent Spiner became her sounding board. She wrote a journal and sent it to him from 1991 to 1993. There were no barriers between them. She felt more at ease and comfortable with Brent than any human being in her life. She didn't sense there was anything about her that he didn't like. Everything she sent him, he was such a positive person, the total opposite of David, her husband. He was so positive about everything she sent him. He was her biggest cheerleader. She talked about everything to Brent. He knew all about her Christian beliefs, all about her beliefs about love, marriage, and sex. There were no barriers between them. Total openness, but they were never crude. And whenever they talked about sex or love or romance, she felt he had such good taste in the way he went about it. The man was the epitome of class in the love-making department. Even though he spoke intimately to her on the phone, there was nothing offensive about it. The way he made her feel when he made love to her on the phone, he just made her feel like she was the most beautiful, gorgeous, voluptuous woman on the planet. By the time he was through talking to her, she felt like she'd been tenderly caressed every inch of her body, and that he was making passionate, erotic, sensual, and yet very sensitive, deep love to her. She was absolutely thrilled by his love-making approach. She thought she never knew there was a man that could be so. One may think he was just an expert manipulator. That was what was so different about him. It wasn't so much that he was sexy. There was a depth of feeling in his expressions. Gail could never find a man attractive just because she thought he was a sexual firebomb in bed. Gail always sensed that with Brent, that it was more than just trying to turn her on sexually, that he had a depth of feeling and a commitment there. He really didn't win her over until she heard his music album, Old Yellow Eyes, back in June 1991. And if you listen to the singing on there, you don't sense a shallow person. The best way to describe how Gail saw Brent as a lover is to listen to that music album he made, especially the song Good Night, Sweetheart. The way he sang that song was how he made love to her on the phone. Good night, sweetheart, though I'm not beside you. Listen to the song. That was how he made love to her on the phone. Just like that. She sensed that he really cared about her. It wasn't just a shallow, tantalizing bounce in bed type of thing with him. He was committed to her. It was the real thing. He had marriage love for her. That was why she couldn't give him up, even when she learned about Laurie. He loved her more than her husband. She somehow knew it in the subconscious depths of her soul. She was basking in that love, and she could not give him up. She was so frustrated that she couldn't give Brent her body, and that was why she strove to be a brilliant writer. She thought if she wrote something great enough and he read it, that would be just as good as giving him sex. The biggest frustration she had in 1991, 1992, 1993, 1994, 1995 was that she couldn't give Brent her body. And the way she took care of that was with her writing. She said, well, I'll make love to him with a great love story. So she decided to become a romance writer. She said, I've got to find some way to communicate what the sky has done for me. So she started writing love stories. She started writing Silver Skies. Another reason it was hard for her to go to Brent right away was that she was thinking about the effect this would have on her son. It was a complicated situation. She wanted God to bless any union between Brent and herself. She didn't feel it was a sin for her to love him, so things went pretty much the way it had in 1991 and 1992. Except she noticed he no longer called her on the holidays after that mysterious 3 weeks of silence he gave her in September 1992. She noticed there was a change in policy. She wasn't sure how to interpret that, but he was just as attentive as he was before. But she did remember that every now and then when she would read data entries, she'd hear about the blonde, the cute blonde, and she kept coming up. So Gail started wondering if maybe there was something more to her than she thought. She wrote Brent and said, I heard about this blonde you're going out with, but I know you don't have a girlfriend. You couldn't have a girlfriend. There's no way any woman would put up with all the attention you give me and still be your girlfriend. So she didn't worry about it. She didn't even ask him if he had a girlfriend because she just knew that anybody who loved her like he did couldn't have a girlfriend. Gail knew he flirted with women. That didn't bother her. She believed in freedom. She didn't want the guy to feel caged in. She wanted him to enjoy other women. She knew he wasn't going to bed with him because he loved her. She could tell he loved her. He was giving her far too much attention. Why, no woman would put up with all the attention he gave her, so she wasn't worried about a girlfriend at all. And she didn't believe in being possessive with him, because one of the problems she had with her husband was jealousy. Her husband was trying to control her, and he wouldn't give her freedom. So she was determined she wouldn't do that to Brent. So she said, it's okay. I don't care if you hang around with other women and have fun with them. That's perfectly fine. I'm not the jealous type. I want you to enjoy yourself. Gail wasn't worried about a girlfriend. In fact, she encouraged him to have female friends. And when she heard about him kissing his coworker Marina Sirtis on the lips, that was cool. She liked Marina. She thought she was nice. It didn't bother her a bit. And she knew that he had women friends. He was a very physical, huggy type of a guy. Gail figured any guy who was as warm and generous as this guy, that was just the way he was. He knew how to have the right balance in his relationships with women. He knew how to express the affection, but he knew how to cut it off before it went too far. Gail had faith in him because he was sensitive in his handling of her, that she just knew that he understood women. He knew how to handle them. Gail used to read comments where women would chase him at Star Trek conventions and how he'd crack jokes and get away from them. She'd laugh and think it was hilarious. She thought, that sounds like him. If he got in an uncomfortable situation, he'd crack a bunch of jokes and joke his way out of it. You can't afford to be the jealous type if you're in love with a Hollywood star. And she wasn't jealous or possessive. She never got mad at him about this. He was getting about 50 marriage proposals a month. Gail wasn't worried about him at all. She sensed he had a very mature, intelligent grasp of the female sex, that he knew how to handle women. So Gail was a little puzzled about this blonde. The conclusion that Gail came to was that she probably worked for Paramount Studios, and she was a business associate. And so Gail just wrote it off. Gail figured if she was something she needed to know about, that Brent would tell her. Gail was writing him love letters up until January 1994 and making love to him in her letters because she was so frustrated. She wanted to marry him, and she felt guilty that she couldn't give him her body because he made it plain that he wanted that. But he just dropped off on that after a while. They just settled off into a semi-romantic, semi-platonic friendship where there were no barriers between them. They talked about anything and everything. There was a very light-hearted, freewheeling, very witty, and very warm and deep friendship between them. The exchanges most of the time were very positive. They never had an out-and-out fight. It was a very positive relationship. Whenever there was a problem, Gail usually just cried a lot, and she'd tell him what he was doing that bothered her. The most frustrating thing about this relationship, if you want to call it that, was he never talked to her. The communication was lacking. But usually she figured things out after a while. She figured something was blocking him. She didn't know what it was, but she figured it was legitimate. And so she just respected that and was very patient with the fact he wouldn't talk to her. 99% of their communication was very positive. They hardly ever were mad at each other. Maybe 1% of the time she would be crying, usually because of a silence, and she usually had a legitimate reason. 1992 went by, and 1993 was pretty uneventful for Gail. She wrote him every day and shared her life with him. She was still working on her writings, still a student at the Institute of Children's Literature, and her goal was to become a professional writer. She dreamed every day about becoming his wife and helping him in his work as a writer, maybe a screenwriter. She did look a little into some screenwriting. But after her Star Trek The Next Generation teleplay Lol got rejected, she decided she wanted to be a novel writer, a prose writer. She decided she didn't want to work for Hollywood after Lol got rejected in late 1992. She sensed that as a Hollywood writer that she would not have creative freedom, that she would be bound too much by the rules of the studios, and that she would be hindered as an artist. So she wanted to work in a medium where she would have the ultimate in artistic expression, where she wouldn't feel like she had to follow rules, that she could make her own rules. So she thought the best route for her was to become a novel writer, so she could create the story that she wanted and not be bound by the guidelines of the studios. She didn't want anyone telling her what was good art, because her goal as a writer was to write stories that she liked. And she didn't want to have to follow some silly guidelines that she thought would stilt her artistic expression or that would make her writing inferior to what it could be. So she thought the best route for her was to be a book writer. She didn't trust Hollywood. When they rejected her script, she sensed that there was something wicked going on there, and she decided she would be a frustrated writer if she worked for Hollywood. So she decided to develop her prose writing skills, and her goal was to become a novel writer, a writer of books, and she wanted to write love stories because she thought that way she could make it up to him. She said she'd write a great love story and pattern characters after her relationship with Brent, and that was what she did. Brent encouraged her to explore herself more. He gave her the courage to not hold back her artistic side. She'd always been kind of ashamed of her artistic creative side. She felt like maybe it was a little sinful because it was so uninhibited. She thought it was proper to be more rigid in her Christianity. Brent took that away. He gave her an inner freedom, a courage to explore new vistas on her inside, to embrace parts of her personality that before she kept inhibited. David found Gail's growth very threatening. And as she grew as a person, she got further and further away emotionally from David. He didn't like it. He found her growth as a person threatening. But she got closer to Brent. She couldn't get rid of Brent because he helped her find herself. He helped her to have the courage to say to the world, "This is me. You can like it or lump it, but this is who I am, my faults, my strengths, my weaknesses." And for the first time in her life, she had the courage to show the world who she really was. She never had the courage to do it before, because she never felt that she was totally acceptable. And that was why she was so shy when she was a little girl. Brent made her blossom. That was the reason he had such a strong impact on her life, and why she fell so deeply in love with him, to the point where he inspired her to perform far greater than she ever thought she could. She was determined that when she studied writing, see, he was a big star. To Gail, he was her example of a person who had the courage to be true to their artistic side, to follow their dream, and to not be dissuaded by those who would laugh at trying to reach the mountain. So she told herself, "I'm going to make him proud of me. I'm going to try to find a mountain with writing." She was determined to be a great writer for him. She wanted him to be proud of her. And she thought another advantage in learning to write was that if she learned to write greatly, not only would she be a blessing to Brent, but she would be a blessing to the world. And she would leave behind a legacy after her death. To her, writing was one of the most awesome gifts that she could develop. She took it as a calling from God, as well as a way of giving something back to Brent to compensate for the fact that she couldn't give him her body. So she said, I'll write for him. She said, I love this man so much, and he's done so much for me, that I'm going to let him see it in my writing. I'm going to write a masterpiece. And that was her goal. She said, everything I write has to be great, because my writing honors a great love. And she was so passionate when she taught herself how to write. This was her standard. She told herself, when she was a student at the Institute of Children's Literature, a correspondence school, she said, I'm not studying to make straight A's. When I study this craft, I'm going to go beyond that. I want to write something so great that I'm going to leave behind a monument, that I'm going to leave a legacy. I'm not satisfied with just making straight A's or just meeting the criteria of this writing school. So when she studied, she tried to get everything out of that course that she could. She got everything from her instructor, award-winning children's author Jim Murphy, that she could get out of him. She encouraged her writing professor, Jim. She encouraged everybody who looked at her writing. She said, I don't want you to be kind to me when you read this script. I want you to rip it apart. If you see anything in there that you don't think is right or that weakens the writing, don't worry about hurting my feelings. I want you to rip it apart top to bottom. I want this thing to be great. She was writing it for Brent. She said, I want you to rip this thing up. Don't worry about hurting my feelings. Rip it up from top to bottom. You see anything in there, don't worry about hurting my feelings. She also recalled that during 1989 and 1990, before Brent wrote her or contacted, she had a real thing for him. There were several nights when she would get down on her knees and she felt led to pray for him all night. She prayed for him to be saved, to accept the Lord as his Savior. She didn't know why. There were just certain times. This was in 1989, 1990. She remembered in her apartment in Miami, she would pray for Brent Spiner all night with tears, just crying for him and asking God to help him. So even though she wasn't after him romantically, she cared about him enough to pray for him all night. For several nights, zero sleep, she was up praying for him all night, and she never told him that she did that for him. It was a secret between her and God. She just had a special love in her heart for that man and a real burden for him. She didn't pray for him 3 nights in a row. Maybe one night, let's say in September, she'd be up all night praying and crying for him, and a couple months later she'd be up all night again. There were about 3 or 4 nights throughout the year where she prayed for him and was up all night. She didn't know why. She just had a special burden for him, and she never told him that she did that for him. But as intelligent and sensitive as he was, maybe he sensed it, she felt, and Brent did sense it. Maybe that was why he fell for her. She never expected him to be romantically interested in her. That wasn't her intention. She thought it would incredibly complicate her life, and that was exactly what it did. But when it happened, she handled it bravely. She just had a problem with her conscience that she couldn't resolve. You might say, if she was so brave, why didn't she just go off and marry him? It wasn't that she didn't have the courage. It wasn't that she was scared of Brent. She was scared of God. She was afraid God would kill her. You have to understand her background. She devoted her life to God. She was willing to go to the mission field. There were times in her 20s that she asked God to kill her if she would sin against him. She asked God to kill her so that her mother would be saved. That's what kind of a Christian she was. She was a very devout Christian, totally dedicated to God. When she sacrificed and went to the Christian university and turned down an opportunity to become an Air Force officer, she didn't have any money. She went by faith. She was afraid she'd end up starving to death at that school. She did have one day that she only had a chicken drumstick because she didn't have money for food, but God took care of her. She learned to take it one day at a time. but she wasn't sure she'd live from one day to the next back then. She remembered she was on that Delta Airlines flight from Miami to Atlanta, and she had packed her bags that night in September 1979, right as the semester started at Baptist University of America in Decatur, Georgia. She was kind of scared on that plane. She thought, am I crazy? I turned down a chance to be an Air Force officer. I go against my family. I only have about $30 in my purse. I don't even have money for tuition at this school. And God tells me to go on this plane and go up to Atlanta and trust him? So she went, and she was a little scared. She thought maybe she was nuts or something. But she had no doubt that God spoke to her. See, you have to understand that she was a Christian who came from a background like that. And then she was hit with the temptation of her life with Brent. And she knew God was real because she'd had experience in prayer with God. She saw him miraculously answer prayer for her when she went to that Christian university called Baptist University of America. She knew he was real, and she feared him. And coming from a background like that, it wasn't easy for her to sin with Brent Spiner. And yet she loved Brent, and she didn't think that was a sin. It was like a delicate balancing act for her. She wanted to love him, and she felt like he needed her encouragement, but yet at the same time, she didn't want the love to tread over into the sin territory. She wanted to make sure she kept her power in prayer, because that's something she always had and that she treasured. And she didn't want to lose it. You may say, why did she keep her love for Brent a secret from everybody? Why didn't she tell her mother or sister? She opened up a little bit to her sister in September 1992, when Brent gave her 3 weeks of silence and her sister called on her birthday, but she didn't tell her too much. She really didn't tell anybody. She opened up a little bit to Leslie Jacobs at Open Door Baptist Church in Linwood, Washington. She was very, very good about keeping her mouth shut. She had a very strong motivation for doing this. She was in love with Brent, and she was afraid that if people knew that he had called her and said he wanted to rape her on the phone, that he would get in trouble. And she could tell that he was too big a man, too great a person, that he wouldn't deserve the unfair criticism that he would get. Because she knew Americans had a lot of sexual hang-ups, so she viciously tried to protect him. That was why she kept her mouth shut, and she never told anybody the whole truth about how extensive Brent and her were communicating, or how much she was communicating with him. Her motive for keeping quiet was to protect him, because she loved him. She loved him enough to die for him. She kept her mouth shut because she knew that if word got out, that it would not be good for him. Because she was a married woman, it just did not look good. She saw something in him that she knew the rest of the world wouldn't see, except his close friends who knew him. So that was why she didn't tell anybody. It wasn't that she was ashamed of him. She was afraid that he would be hurt, that he would be misunderstood, and she could tell there was something big and great about him, something very courageous and generous, and she viciously protected him. She sensed something really great about that man, and she knew he was the type of man who would risk misunderstanding, to be great in secret, and to take public scorn. She could tell he was like that. She thought it was precious that he had that attitude. It was so opposite her husband, who wanted everybody to think he was great, but in private he stunk. Whereas Brent was just the opposite. In public, he didn't seem to care what kind of impression he made, but in private he was great. He never ever treated her with the slightest hint of disrespect. In all of his dealings with her, he was the utmost insensitivity, and always very kind and tender, and extremely generous. And she felt a man like that deserved her vicious protection. And that was what he got. Gail always had a kind of independent streak. She always feared God more than men, and she made her moral decisions based on that. She was willing to risk misunderstanding to do what she felt was loving, generous, kind, and courageous, even if it meant she'd have to risk public censure. And she made the choice that she was going to stand behind Brent Spiner, even if it meant her reputation went down the drain. 'Cause she wasn't concerned about her reputation. She was more concerned about her character, about who she really was. And it got her into some trouble. But she knew that Brent was not a bad person. She knew that the actions and the risks that he took with her, where he made himself emotionally vulnerable, that if she was a bad woman, that she could have ruined him. But she had too much love in her heart, and maybe she had enough greatness in her, that she could not betray somebody that she thought was great. And she didn't judge him to be great because of the fact that he was famous, or because he was a big star. She saw some inner qualities of generosity, courage, of a willingness to sacrifice, a humanitarian heart. And she realized that he was often misunderstood by the public, because he often did what he felt was right, even if it meant being scorned and misunderstood. She respected him for that. That's why she stuck by him so viciously. She knew that her Christian friends would think that she stood by him because she was enamored with his fame and his fortune. But in her heart, she knew that God knew her heart, and that God understood that it wasn't his fame and his fortune that she was in love with. Many times she went to God in prayer and she said, God, one of the biggest reasons I haven't gone to this man is because he is famous. And if I marry him, it's going to make you look bad. Everybody's going to think I dumped my poor husband for this rich celebrity. I love this man because of who he is, because of his generosity, his courage, his compassion, his humanitarian heart. I sense greatness in him, and it just aggravates me that because he's famous, because he's rich, that I know if I go to him, that it would bring disgrace to your name, and I claim to be a Christian. I wish you would make a way for me to go to him, so I wouldn't have to bring shame to your name in the process. She prayed to God about this all the time. I love this man so much that even if he didn't have any money, and he decided to go to the mission field, I'd go to the mission field with him. That's the kind of a man I'd want to go to the mission field with, not the one I've got now. Because with a man like Brent, I know I'd have a strong marriage. Anyways, she learned from reading the letters of comment in data entries that Brent had gone to a convention in Houston in 1994. She tried to keep up with everything about him. She wanted to know all about him, 'cause he didn't really talk to her that much. She'd read in the letters of comments from one of his fans he had gone to a convention in San Antonio in February 1994. And in this letter of comment, they mentioned that he was at this San Antonio convention. His mother was there along with his family. Gail remembered very distinctly the letter writer said, and who's that cute blonde that was with him? The way she reacted to that was she was thinking, he's with some cute blonde woman who's going with him to conventions? That's strange. She figured, well, he was still giving her lots of attention. This was in May 1994 when she read this. The only difference was after September 1992 when he gave her the 3 weeks of silence. He no longer called her on holidays. That had stopped. She remembered that. She thought that was strange. When Christmas or Thanksgiving rolled around, he would never call her on a holiday. She'd usually get silence on a holiday, and she thought that was kind of strange. She didn't know what to make of that, because before September 1992, he always called her on holidays. It was like he was saying, Merry Christmas, or Happy whatever, Happy Birthday. In fact, if she remembered correctly, on September 15th, 1991, he called her on her birthday. Yeah, he did. So one thing that changed after September 1992 was he never, whenever there was a major holiday, Gail always got the silent treatment. Because she was not the kind of woman who made a big deal about holidays. It didn't affect her in the least. She noticed that there was a change in policy, though, but he was so attentive to her in every other way, so she didn't make a big deal over it. Gail's Star Trek teleplay Lull made print in 2 installments. The first half made print in September 1993, and the second half in January 1994. Melody Rondeau pretty much printed it the way it was, though there were always typos in the publication. She was very, very busy. Gail didn't think Melody made a profit from this fanzine. It was always a labor of love for this editor. And Gail just appreciated the fact that she printed it, but thought it very interesting that the first time she got a hint that Brent might have a girlfriend was when the first half of her teleplay made print. She thought the name of one of the letter writers about the cute blonde was Mary Heaston. She claimed she was a college student or something. Brent was at a Star Trek convention in San Antonio, and Gail remembered distinctly this letter writer was curious about this blonde. And every time the letter writers wrote about Brent with this blonde, she noticed they always described him as nervous, like he looked real nervous. One letter writer commented that he kept looking at the blonde woman who was with him, like for some sort of approval or something. That concerned Gail. When she read that this person seemed to make him nervous, the letter writer claimed they thought he was nervous because he was at the Star Trek convention. Brent had been a little bit shy with the public. The letter writers would insinuate that it was probably because he was not used to being with his fans. But Gail knew him and knew how comfortable he was with her. Her impression was she was worried about him. She remembered back then she said to herself, "Whoever this blonde woman is, she's not good for him because she's making him nervous." She remembered that every time they wrote about him being with this blonde, they would say he kept looking at her when he gave his speech or answered fan questions at these Star Trek conventions. And she thought, why would Brent allow a good-looking blonde woman to go with him? She was obviously good-looking, because they all said she was cute and everything. Why would he allow her to go with him when he was with his family? Gail was starting to wonder who she was, and she got a little curious. But she was concerned about him. She figured that maybe Paramount didn't like her because they rejected her brilliant teleplay so quickly. And she thought that was kind of strange, because she knew she wrote a good one. She was also getting the Star Trek magazine, and they always gave advice to speculative script writers. That was what you were called if you were an unknown teleplay writer trying to write for Star Trek. They always gave advice, and they said they weren't accepting any sequels to a story that had to do with lore. She wrote something with lore in it because she remembered reading in the fanzine that Brent wanted a sequel written to a lore episode because he thought it would be fun to act in, so she wrote him a sequel. See, she was reading the fanzines to learn more about him and what she could do to make him happy, and that was when she first found out about this blonde. But she didn't dwell on it. She wasn't jealous of her, she was worried about Brent, because she noticed immediately, looking at him through the eyes of love, that whoever this woman was, she was making him nervous. Her first gut feeling about this blonde was she didn't know who she was, but she didn't like her. And it had nothing to do with the fact that she was blonde, though she noticed everybody described her as the cute blonde. It was the fact that she made him nervous. She said, "I don't want him to be nervous." And she never forgot that 3 weeks of silence in September 1992. She somehow thought there was some sort of a connection between the suffering look on Brent's face that Gail picked up on in some internet photos and that silence. And then she remembered after he gave her 3 weeks of silence, he called her about a week and a half after her birthday. Someone who had so bonded with her did not deserve to be kicked off her wiretap. And Gail refused to dishonor Brent in this way, even when she was confused about Laurie McBride. This drove Laurie McBride crazy.
In a world of secrets where darkness reigns.